You're driving down a long highway, lost in an area you don't know too well, trying to find the right turn that'll have you heading back towards your home. You keep driving, the nighttime quiet all around you. Deciding to try and break that silence, you reach for the radio, turning the dial to filter through all the garbled, distorted voices and songs from nearby local radio stations that are too far out of range to come through clearly. You try your best to listen to the music from one radio station, but eventually the sound of the static only makes you wish for the silence you were trying to break. Your fingers nudge the tuning dial on your car radio once again, and finally, something comes through. It isn't loud or clear, but under the distortion, you can make out the sound, and it isn't a song or even a late news broadcast. The first thing you hear sounds like a short musical tone, only for about 10 seconds. Next, a young girl's voice speaking in a language you don't understand, even through the distorted audio. From her accent, you assume it's Russian, but you still have no idea what the words she's saying mean. With nothing else to listen to, you let the broadcast play. Still driving alone in the dark with nothing but the strange adolescent voice to accompany you, your mind begins to wander. She sounds like she's speaking something, but the rhythm of the words is somehow familiar to you, even though you don't speak Russian. Then it hits you. She's counting, but you don't feel smart for having worked that out. Instead, something about knowing that makes your blood run cold. You carry on driving through the night. After a few short minutes, the Russian girl stops counting, and the musical tone plays again under the distortion, leaving you alone in the car once again, with nothing but your thoughts and questions of what exactly you just heard. Thankfully, we have the answer. What you heard was SCP-3034. Since 1964, this same broadcast has been made a vast number of times, 627 times in fact. You'd have to be within 2 kilometers of the broadcast's point of origin to hear it, where Foundation personnel have tried and failed numerous times to triangulate its source. The numbers heard recited in the SCP-3034 broadcast are actually a countdown from 200, read aloud in Russian. All Foundation staff are able to do while stationed at the nearby Provisional Site 3034 is scour radio frequencies for occurrences of SCP-3034. Checking their equipment is properly maintained and calibrated before they are eventually rotated off-site and replaced with a new group of staff. There is only one rule that any Foundation members working at Provisional Site 3034 must follow. They are only permitted to send one radio transmission with their equipment, a single phrase in reply to the SCP-3034 broadcast. Vizyo Harashu. Receiving this, the countdown stops and the broadcast ends, but never permanently. SCP-3034 has been known to repeatedly occur, seemingly at random. The shortest recorded gap between broadcasts was 2 weeks, while the longest so far lasted 6 whole months. You may have heard the term number station mentioned before, but these are far from just random numerical sequences sent out over the airwaves without purpose. General speculation surrounding number stations points to them being the tools of espionage agents, a way of sending coded, highly sensitive messages or information without the risk of compromising their cover. The use of number station transmissions is often attributed to spies working on foreign soil, who utilize shortwave radio frequencies, speech synthesis, Morse code, and either regular or sporadic timing schedules. While it's true that times have changed and technology has progressed considerably, there appears to be evidence that number stations are still used among various intelligence and espionage agencies today. Despite being considered an old-fashioned method of communication, these low-tech shortwave stations remain a viable, reliable option for the transmission and reception of intelligence to field agents. The CONET project is a comprehensive archive of this phenomenon, and its founder, Aiken Fernandez, has long been fascinated by number stations. According to him, this system is completely secure because the messages can't be tracked. The recipient could be anywhere. You just send spies to the country and get them to buy a radio. They know where to tune and when. So what does the distorted broadcast of numbers from SCP-3034 mean? Is it the work of covert agents? And if so, whose side are they on? Most importantly, Why does the SCP Foundation make certain there are always 3 of its personnel on site, ready to send the all is well message whenever SCP-3034 begins broadcasting? SCP-3034 was first discovered by the Foundation in 1964 after a defector from the Soviet GRUP, a division tasked with acquiring and studying anomalies on behalf of the USSR, gave them a tip. Commander Robert Malthus, along with a team of 6, including a man named Agent Browning, selected for his knowledge of Russian dialects, were sent to investigate at Provisional Site 3034. Here, the team uncovered partially burned records and logbooks, all kept in Russian, along with evidence that the site had been evacuated shortly before their arrival. Carved into a desk, also in Russian, were 2 phrases: "Don't let her finish," and "Tell her all is well." On the team's second day at the site, an automated alarm sounded at 7:30 a.m., alerting them to the incoming SCP-3034 broadcast. Following the instructions on the desk, Agent Browning was able to stop the broadcast, telling the young Russian girl that all was well. A tape was partially recovered by the team from the site and translated from Russian. The GRUP members that had previously inhabited the station had interrogated one of their own, a man named Sergei, whom they accused of stealing state property. "She's not state property," he replied. "She has a name." While his GRUP superior accused Sergei of planning to defect to the United States, allegedly in exchange for money and asylum, Sergei denied any collusion with America. He claimed that the GRUP at Provisional Site 3034 were meddling with powers they could not possibly hope to understand. His superior, a man named Vaslov, dismissed this, claiming their work to be no different to the United States experimentation with atomic weapons at the time. "One does not make deals with atom bombs," Sergei argued. "One certainly does not sacrifice little girls to them." Shortly after this, a struggle broke out, with Sergei having to be restrained while urging Vaslov to cease any and all interference with it. The man spoke of terrible nightmares that he'd had, voices screaming in the darkness. "That's what it wants, Vaslov. That's what it is. You cannot make a deal with this thing. We have finally contained it, and now you want to offer it." The tape's audio ends shortly after this point, with no clear answer as to what Sergei was referring to, or what offer these Russian operatives had made to it. Ever since the discovery of SCP-3034, members of the SCP Foundation have worked tirelessly to understand the purpose of these countdowns, as well as determine their origin. By September 2012, Dr. Schoolhouse was reaching the end of his tether with the investigation into the SCP-3034 broadcast. Over almost half a century, the Foundation had made well over 600 recordings of the Russian girls' countdowns, but still hadn't determined any noteworthy information. They were prohibited from contacting the girl via the same radio frequency, only permitted to use the phrase that stopped her countdowns. Running out of options, Schoolhouse contacted his colleague, Dr. Emerson, asking for an in-depth vocal analysis of the various recordings of SCP-3034. Even if they could narrow down where the broadcast was coming from, maybe by determining the girl's geographical location from her dialect, then that would be at least some slight progress into understanding SCP-3034. While unable to discover the girl's location, Dr. Emerson's analysis did yield some interesting findings. Emerson learned that these countdowns were not pre-recorded. The variations in the Russian girl's voice, her tone, her pitch, all seemed to indicate that every instance of the broadcast was unique. Rather than use the same recording, this girl had been counting down over and over hundreds of times for almost 50 years. But there was more. Schoolhouse and Emerson then examined the distortion, the sounds interfering with the audio of the Russian girl's countdowns. What had initially seemed like garbled static seemed to actually be additional voices. And much like the girl's voice, these distorted voices were unique, different in every broadcast. However, Schoolhouse and Emerson were unable to accurately determine what these voices were saying. Given that the girls' countdowns were always cut short by the use of the phrase, "all is well," the doctors did not have long enough samples of the audio to analyze the other distorted voices. With permission from the Foundation, the next 5 occurrences of the SCP-3034 broadcast were allowed to carry on for longer, giving the 2 doctors enough audio to determine exactly what the distorted voices were. And the results were extremely troubling. They were screams. thousands upon thousands of children's voices endlessly screaming. Both Dr. Emerson and Dr. Schulkill agreed that it would be best to continue responding to SCP-3034 with the correct phrase, and refused to analyze the distorted screaming audio any further. 3 years later, while stationed at Provisional Site 3034, a Foundation researcher named Dr. Uriel Willis decided to take matters into her own hands. She conducted an experiment that had not been sanctioned by the Foundation and attempted to make contact with a Russian girl giving the countdowns. Hearing Dr. Willis's voice, the girl stopped her countdown. After 5 long, painfully silent seconds, a new broadcast was heard. A piercing, high-pitched screech that caused extreme pain and dizziness to all the staff working on site. Unable to bear the disorienting sound, Dr. Willis told the girl all is well and caused the noise to stop. The following day, SCP researchers noted that there had been a significant increase in cases of missing children all around the world. A majority of these disappearances happened at the same time the screech had been broadcast and remain unsolved to this day. Dr. Willis faced disciplinary action from the SCP Foundation, and any further testing of SCP-3034 and attempts to communicate with the Russian girl were prohibited. Only one distinct change has been noted in the SCP-3034 broadcast since this incident. Almost a month later, the countdown was detected and the correct phrase given, but researchers noted that, instead of starting her countdown from 200, this time the Russian girl began counting down from 199. Nobody knows what will happen if the Russian girl's countdown is allowed to reach 0. Personnel working at Provisional Site 3034 are told to always offer her the necessary phrase before this point in the countdown. Attempting to interfere with the broadcast by contacting this girl directly not only resulted in intense pain for SCP staff, but also seems to have caused an unconfirmed number of child disappearances around the globe, as well as reducing the countdown starting number from 200 to 199. After a long night on the road, you finally find the right turn, sending you in the right direction. As you drive through the night, you keep telling yourself one thing, one small phrase over and over again. You hope the words will eventually give you comfort, but deep down you start to realize just how hollow they are. That it's just a lie we tell ourselves so we don't have to face the inevitable. But still, what choice do you have but to keep telling yourself that all is well? It was the year 2000, and 7-year-old Xenia Chow was like a lot of children her age, bright but ignored. She had a youthful enthusiasm for knowledge and learning, and with the right encouragement, it was obvious she'd go on to do great things. But her parents were both working 2 jobs apiece to make ends meet, so outside of school hours, little Xenia spent a lot of her time alone. She learned to cook and clean for herself, since it would often be way past her bedtime when her parents finally got home from work. They communicated largely through sticky notes left for her on the fridge before they left for work in the morning. It would be easy for someone like Xenia to fall through the cracks, her potential wasted, and get forced into the same endless rat race as her parents. And that probably would have happened if her brush with SCP-5094 hadn't changed the course of her life forever. Like a lot of parents who couldn't spend as much time with their children as they'd like, Mr. and Mrs. Chow gave Xenia occasional gifts as a way to try and make up for their absence. Mostly, they gave Xenia new books to add to her growing collection, but their 2-bedroom apartment only had so much space for books. A year ago, the family had bought a new desktop computer to share. These days, this would be the answer to a lonely bookworm's prayers, but the internet was still in its infancy back then. Everything changed when her parents bought her a copy of the Miss J's Whiz Kidz Schoolhouse CD-ROM. Miss J's Whiz Kidz Schoolhouse was never a popular program. Produced by Shoot the Moon Software in 1999, the game sold poorly on the CD-ROM market for 5 years until the company filed for bankruptcy in 2004. But that didn't matter to Xenia. As far as she was concerned, receiving a copy of Miss J's Whiz Kidz Schoolhouse was nothing short of a miracle, and she was far more right than she knew. She didn't have just any piece of primitive educational software on her hands. Xenia Chow was playing with magic. After the software loaded, a cheerful figure appeared on Xenia's monitor. This was Miss J. a stylized 2D teacher in a low-res but colorful 3D classroom. What can you learn from Miss J? Well, pretty much anything. And Xenia, as a lonely kid without many friends, had all the time in the world. She spent days on end learning from Miss J, and soon Xenia went from a bright child to a bona fide child genius. Her largely absent parents barely even noticed when their child started demonstrating an advanced knowledge of mechanical engineering and a newfound fluency in Swahili. And not only did Miss J, now known to Xenia as Miss Joyce, teach her students with supernatural effectiveness, she also seemed almost like she was alive. She was a warm, calm, encouraging figure who took a genuine, personal enthusiasm in the education and happiness of her students, more than many real teachers even. But sadly, not all good things last forever. When Xenia turned 12, her family bought a new computer, and the old Miss J's Whiz Schoolhouse CD-ROM was no longer compatible with the new operating system. The disk gathered dust in the closet while Xenia passed through high school and then got into a prestigious college. She received her PhD several years earlier than expected and showed such promise in her scientific field that a certain organization took notice. You guessed it, the SCP Foundation. The Foundation is only interested in adding the best and brightest to their ranks, and thanks to the tutoring from Miss J, Xenia Chow certainly fit the bill. She was assigned to the role of junior researcher, and little did she know, she was about to run into an old friend in her new line of work. The Foundation first discovered evidence of Miss J's anomalous qualities while researching a series of strange forum posts in 2012. On a thread discussing abandonware, which is software for which official support is no longer available, there were multiple reports of a so-called living character in an old CD-ROM many of them had owned as children. Seeing as the technology to use the CD-ROM was obsolete, Shoot the Moons had reportedly extremely low sales for the title, and nobody on the forum had kept their copy, the Foundation classified this apparent anomaly as neutralized. No problem. That was, until then junior researcher Xenia Chow was briefed on this particular SCP 10 years later. She remembered exactly what the forum posters were talking about, and what's more, she still had her old copy at home. The senior Foundation researchers were astounded. An opportunity to study this forgotten anomaly had just fallen into their laps, and it was all thanks to their brilliant new junior researcher. Xenia's superiors ordered her to bring in her copy of the Miss J's Whiz Schoolhouse CD-ROM, and then real testing began. And after rigorous examination of the software, it appears by all accounts that Miss J really is the world's greatest teacher, in spite of the fact she's a collection of pixels on a basic CD-ROM program from the tail end of the 90s. What Miss J seemed to specialize in was intensive courses. She had the ability to make students certifiable experts in almost any subject through courses that can last upwards of 30 hours and spread out over just a few days. But this isn't as students become so enraptured in learning that they forget accounting for their most basic needs and experience a decline in process story. Miss J's lesson plans account for regular bathroom, meal, and even recreation breaks for students. Her talents easily account for Xenia Chow's remarkable academic success, the same success that got her picked up by the SCP Foundation. Naturally, if they had a technology on their hands that could reliably create experts and geniuses with seemingly no negative consequences, the Foundation knew that Miss J and what she had to teach could be immensely valuable in their mission to effectively secure, contain, and protect other anomalies. But we're not talking about the Chaos Insurgency here. The Foundation would never start to use an anomaly for their own benefit without proper testing. So that's exactly what they did. Their experiments on SCP-5094 began at Site-15, and after ascertaining that Miss J posed no real threat to her students, they recruited a local elementary school to provide human test subjects closer to Miss J's intended demographic. The Foundation found that there were a few constraints between every lesson given by Miss J to one of her students. Before teaching the really mind-blowingly complex stuff, she would always begin with a basic primer on letters, colors, and numbers to make sure she and her students were all on the same page. Another constant was that all her students would refer to her as some variation of Miss J, with examples including the names Miss Julie, Miss Jenny, and Miss Joy. One experiment was performed on Amy Myers, a little girl from the 3rd grade. Her academic record showed she was a bright and eager student, but she was described by her teachers as being especially shy. Amy referred to Miss J as Miss Janie and asked to be given a lesson on her favorite animal, cats. Of course, Miss J gladly obliged and gave Amy a 15-hour lesson split over the course of 2 days, which the Foundation closely observed. By the time the lesson was completed, the results were truly astonishing. Amy demonstrated knowledge of feline behavior, diet, and physiology on the level of professional animal behavioral scientists. She became upset when the session ended and the program was switched off, having become attached to Miss J. No further anomalous effects were reported. The next subject was a student from the 2nd grade named Devon Williams. Devon had a poor academic record and behavioral issues stemming from several learning disabilities. In the past, teachers had reported Devon having real difficulty engaging with their lessons, and the Foundation wanted to see if Miss J's supernatural teaching abilities fared any better. Devon chose to be educated on the subject of trains, and was given a 15-hour course on the subject spread over 2 days. Devon had no difficulty engaging with these lessons, and after their conclusion, he displayed a level of knowledge on railway engineering comparable to a graduate-level education on the subject. Devon was so engaged in his lessons that he had to be physically removed from the room once the course had completed because he'd become so attached to his new teacher. The Foundation was feeling extremely optimistic about the prospect of using Miss J to train potential recruits, seeming as she seemed to be able to teach even the most difficult juvenile subjects. However, the Foundation needed to prove that Miss J could be just as effective teaching adults. For the next test, they recruited D14417, a 24-year-old member of D-Class personnel who described himself as a poor student and tested poorly on pre-screening attentiveness and focus evaluations. He was the perfect candidate for the first adult test of Miss J. To the delight of the Foundation higher-ups, D14417 excelled. Miss J made him a verifiable expert in law, and he was able to pass a mock bar exam with a grade of 310 after his course. Much like the children, he felt intense sadness once the experiment ended, stating that Miss J was the best teacher he had ever had. He's since been selectively anesthetized, released, and is pursuing a degree in criminal law with his new knowledge. Needless to say, the Foundation was impressed. The last thing they needed to know was who exactly this Miss J truly was. To do this, they'd conduct an interview, and thankfully, they already had someone who had a pre-established rapport with the subject, Xenia Chow. When Xenia began the interview, Miss J recognized her immediately. She was delighted to see one of her students go on to find such success in her chosen field. Xenia questioned Miss J on what she truly was, and Miss J responded that she honestly wasn't sure. All she knew for sure was that she was passionate about helping lonely children who love to learn embrace their education. That's really all there was to it, and it appears she was telling the truth. So far, the Foundation has found nothing that hints at a nefarious motivation behind Miss J's actions. It would appear she truly does just want to help children. Xenia, touched by the kindness that this safe class anomaly showed her as a neglected child, and having now seen the positive impact that she had on children like her, thanked Miss J for all she'd done and left the interview happy that there was an SCP out there who just wanted to change people's lives for the better. And probably all of us would be a little better off if there were more. After all, this was one of the few SCPs who changed a few good people's lives for the better. And all of us can probably learn something from the kindness and patience of Miss J.
Hello, you're watching SCP Explained, and today we've got an offer you simply can't refuse. The very latest in anomalous self-improvement technology, which the SCP Foundation calls SCP-212, but we much prefer to call it the Improver. Believe us when we say this miraculous device will change your life. You'll never be the same after a run-in with the Improver. It'll make you fitter, healthier, better. Not convinced? Don't worry. Just sit back and let us sell you the dream. Here's some unpleasant news. You're going to die! No matter how healthy you are right now, there will inevitably come a day when your lungs stop pumping, your ticker stops ticking, and all those delightful little synapses in your brain stop sending electrical and chemical signals to and fro. What a bummer! Why would you want to be dead? You can't do stuff when you're dead. And it's all because everyone is eventually betrayed by the very things currently keeping them alive. Those pesky, squishy, fallible organs. But thanks to the improver, getting stuck with the organs you were born with is a problem of yesteryear. No matter what those lousy sarkists tell you, the flesh is unreliable. Metal and plastic, on the other hand, that's built to last. Bleeding hearts talk a lot about quality of life. But what really matters is quantity of life. And if you're strong enough, that's what the improver, a state-of-the-art piece of medical technology, will give you. Don't look so afraid. You replace your phone every year. You replace your laptop every few years, so why get all sentimental about needing to trade in your old liver, eyes, limbs, or skin for the new model? Or in the words of another great businessman, why be you when you can be new? Not convinced? Let us tell you about the incredible features that the improver has to offer. I'm talking 3 top-of-the-line fully opposable plastic and steel autonomous medical limbs. That's industry lingo for robot arms that work on their own with 500, count 'em, 500 different attachments. But I know what you're thinking, 500 attachments, where am I gonna find the room for all that, SCP explained? To which we say, don't worry about it. Due to its spatially anomalous properties, the improver is able to store all these attachments within its arms without any additional space concerns. And hey, I see that nervous look in your eye. You're worried about the operating costs, right? But don't worry, there's no need. The improver is completely self-powered with no discernible power source. And you know the thing is safe because the SCP Foundation has given it the Safe Object class. Sure, that technically doesn't mean it's not dangerous, but it does mean it won't sprout legs and walk off if you leave it to your own devices, am I right, folks? So you're looking at a long-term investment with the 3-year warranty and an endorsement from the fabulous folks at the Church of the Broken God. You just can't argue with these deals, my friends. We even offer competitive rates against Marshall, Carter, and Dark. But hey, we're not trying to pull the wool over your eyes here. You're a smart consumer. We know that you know the actual financial cost is only one layer of the overall cost. Time and training is also, of course, a factor. But we've got some good news for you, Sunshine. The improver is 100% user-friendly. No setup, no mess, no problem, no trying to interpret poorly written instructions or watch padded-out YouTube tech tutorials where the guy just will not get to the point. The improver operates itself. It may be a piece of hyper-advanced anomalous technology, but it's easier to use than most wireless printers. Am I right? Am I right? The steps to using the improver are so simple a monkey could do it. Just step within a 1.5 meter range of the machine and it will do the rest. You'll feel your troubles melt away as the powerful mechanical arms grab you and restrain you against the floor. You'll be subjected to a brief, relaxing scan where the improver will determine exactly what needs to be changed about your fragile human physiology. And then, before you know it, surgery will commence!
Warning. SCP Explained is not liable for any excruciating pain caused by the improver. Medical sedatives and anesthetics are sold separately. The consumer is responsible for their own pain relief when using the improver. Second warning. The consumer is also responsible for their own blood transfusions when using the improver. Neither the improver nor SCP Explained is liable for any blood loss while using the improver. Your blood, your problem.
Now with those tiny little caveats out of the way, we carry on telling you just how fantastic the improver is. Sure, flesh-worshipping sarcist losers and haters will tell you that it has a mortality rate of around 47%, but we prefer to look on the bright side and focus on its excellent 53% survival rate. Rest assured the odds are still very much in your favor when you use the improver. And doesn't adding a slight risk to the equation just make the whole process even more exciting? We certainly think it does. And in the reasonably likely event that you survive using the improver, the benefits will vastly outweigh the costs. It can do incredible things like lining your joints with graphite, replacing your nasty flesh organs with more powerful artificial ones, adding new or duplicate organs, replacing those unreliable teeth with serrated steel blades, and so much more. Is there anything this absolute marvel of a machine can't do? Doctors hate it. The improver is here to fix every aspect of your life and health with its simple, anomalous tricks. It even has a special sealant for wound closing that no medical professional on Earth has access to. What is it exactly? Well, if we told you, I'm afraid we'd have to kill you. It's a trade secret. You'd have to be crazy not to want the improver in your home. But if for some crazy reason you still need to be convinced, let's look at some real success stories of the improver in action. straight from SCP Foundation testing logs. Listen close and soon you'll see the improver literally makes satisfied customers. The Foundation put a 28-year-old African-American agent into the improver of his own volition. It replaced his boring lower jawbone with a super dense ceramic jaw, with ceramic blades instead of teeth. It also removed his spine and replaced it with a synthetic polymer, which was easily affixed to the base of his skull. And at no extra charge, it even coated his ribcage and pelvis with a thin layer of ceramic before removing his lungs, eyes, and liver for cleaning and replacement. That's right, cleaning. The improver can remove organs and, through a patented cleaning process, remove genetic defects and allow them to appear younger and healthier than generic Brand X organs. This agent has since returned to active duty and is even better at his job, all thanks to the improver. Looking good out there, champ. A 42-year-old British Foundation researcher was submitted for testing on the improver. It replaced his teeth with sleek, super dense ceramic, reinstated his inefficient feet, and replaced them with a complex latticework covered in sticky pads that would let him climb on any surface and hold up to 225 kilograms of weight. It also took out and cleaned a huge number of his organs, removed his bone marrow, and replaced it with blue synthetic gel. Much more effective, we assure you, and inserted a few random bits of metal into his brain at no extra cost. Sadly, this researcher passed away during the bone marrow removal process, but for all we know, that could easily just be a coincidence. Next came an agent codenamed AA, who had suffered a pretty severe accident at work, losing all his limbs, one of his eyes, a few of his organs, and suffering a pretty traumatic head injury, namely taking a piece of circuit board to the brain during an explosion. He was given over to the improver, seeing as he didn't really have much to lose in terms of physical integrity. But seeing that it's an amazing piece of groundbreaking technology, the improver never takes the obvious option. It gave AA a chemical that forced him into a coma, and then properly integrated the circuit board into his brain. It continues to spread and assimilate more of his brain matter while he's in a comatose state. Though when he awakens with a much more efficient brain, he'll probably be incredibly grateful to the improver for helping him like this. And it's not just people with severe injuries that the improver can lend 3 helping robotic hands to. It's also the victims of severe and even anomalous diseases. Take victims of SCP-217, a rather horrific and painful disease that mechanizes the entire body until the sufferers aren't really themselves anymore. A normal, uninspired SCP Foundation researcher may look at someone like this and see a lost cause. But with the help of the improver, no cause is lost. A D-class in the advanced stages of the disease was run through the machine, and while the exact details of what it did to him are another trade secret, it's safe to say he was truly fighting fit when he came out on the other side. We mean that literally. He easily escaped containment and overpowered 2 heavily armed guards before taking the lives of several members of Foundation staff before being captured and terminated sometime later. You can't argue with those incredible results, folks. Next came a 26-year-old SCP Foundation researcher who, due to an unfortunate brush with a less wonderful and beneficial anomaly, had been rendered completely blind. However, when he was brought into the grasp of the improver, it immediately set to work on solving the doctor's little problem. It removed his 2 non-functioning eyes and made the interesting creative choice of widening the 2 cavities in his head so they met in the middle and formed one huge cavity for a single large sensory organ. This cavity was then filled with large metal spikes resembling hair, which are far more interesting than typical eyes. During the improver's delicate medical procedures, the scientist inexplicably entered a state of visible distress and began repeating the phrase, "It tastes all wrong." At this point, the metal cilia in the scientist's single large cavity began to grow, expanding through the roof of the cavity and into the subject's brain, killing him. We want to specify that SCP Explained and the improver are in no way responsible for this unfortunate incident. It's entirely the researcher's fault for setting off his own metal eye cavity cilia. Before we bring this anomalous infomercial to an end, and of course before you immediately grab your credit card and buy your own improver device, we want to sneak a few more disclaimers under the wire. For starters, the improver doesn't work on animals. When a rat was used as a test subject, the device attempted to modify the rat into a bipedal being, removing the majority of its organs and replacing it with white paste. So if your pet rat gets sick, just take it to the vet instead. The improver also doesn't work on corpses. It may be a miraculous piece of technology, but it's not a literal miracle worker, folks. One freshly executed D-class was presented to the improver, and instead of operating on him, the improver cut open his stomach and instead began constructing something out of metal he had consumed the night prior to his death. A seafood dinner. The broken crustacean parts were then constructed into a bioluminescent lobster-like creature. So if you're planning on bringing someone back from the dead, we're afraid you're going to need to take up necromancy instead. But if you haven't died yet and you're looking to improve yourself, then you cannot invest in a better product than the Improver. The one problem is that the only known prototype of the Improver is currently locked in an SCP Foundation containment site. So getting your hands on these 3 special arms may cost you your life. What? Who said attaining perfection would be easy?
As we all know, the SCP Foundation secures, contains, and protects the various anomalies under its custody. But their mission isn't limited to just grabbing the object and chucking it into a containment locker at the bottom of a classified site deep below the surface of the Earth. The Foundation wants to get a comprehensive, full understanding of all the strange items, creatures, and humanoids in its custody, because that's the only way to understand what they're capable of, what danger they pose, and how to effectively contain them. That much is logical. But the problem is that there's no global scientific community surrounding anomalies, at least not ones willing to cooperate with the Foundation. Perhaps the Chaos Insurgency or Global Occult Coalition have some scientists who have studied anomalies, or the various government agencies that know about the anomalous world like the Unusual Incidents Unit or Soviet GRUP. But for the most part, the Foundation is utterly alone when it comes to figuring out how these anomalies work, what they are, and how to combat them. So the Foundation does what any institution would do: experiments. Many of the Foundation's most important and iconic anomalies are defined by the experiments the white-coated scientists have performed on them, sometimes even using human subjects through the notorious and infamous D-Class program. Everyone knows about how SCP-682, the hard-to-destroy lizard, has been subjected to practically every known weapon and attack under the sun in an attempt to kill the highly dangerous, hateful predator. And who can forget SCP-914, the Clockworks, and the countless objects the Foundation has put through it on its 5 settings to see what it spits out. Needless to say, the Foundation's experiments are incredibly important to how the organization functions, so those SCPs that can offer lots of testing options are very treasured and prized, along with being iconic and legendary throughout the Foundation. Today we're going to be looking at one such anomaly, but not a dangerous, hostile, man-eating predator like SCP-682, or a mysterious eldritch machine like SCP-914. No, today we're going to be looking at something much more simpler than that. A coffee machine. Yes, today we're going to be inspecting SCP-294, affectionately referred to by guards and personnel as the coffee machine. Though you probably don't want to order a hot cup of joe in this coffee machine lest you, well, let's not get ahead of ourselves. The first thing you see when you open the SCP-294 file is its number, of course. Item 294, Object Class Euclid. The next thing you see is the image. If you were imagining a tiny little coffee maker before, this should get rid of that. SCP-294 is big, the kind of coffee machine you'd see in a factory break room. It's almost the size of a vending machine, and has a big colored window showing a few cups of coffee, along with the slots for cash and coins so drinkers can pay for their espressos. But the most notable feature on SCP-294 is the full keyboard on the front panel. It's a typical QWERTY keyboard, just like yours, with a spacebar and everything. Why on earth would a coffee machine need a keyboard? The special containment procedures paint an interesting picture, by which we mean there aren't any. SCP-294 doesn't need any special procedures, secret rituals, or complex machines to keep it contained. But it's still Euclid. So only personnel who have security clearance of level 2 or higher are allowed to interact with it at the moment. This is surprising when you realize that SCP-294 is currently being held not in an anomalous item locker or containment cell, but exactly where you'd expect to find a big coffee machine, a break room. Specifically the Site-19 second floor personnel break room. But it's not alone. It's monitored by 2 guards with level 3 clearance around the clock. For them, sitting in the break room all day guarding a coffee machine that can't move and is too heavy to lift has to be a pretty sweet gig, considering what other kinds of jobs are available at the Foundation. But all that raises even more mysteries. What the heck is up with this coffee machine? The description starts off obvious enough. Affirmed that yes, SCP-294 is indeed a standard coffee vending machine, but with the difference we all noticed earlier. Instead of a simple button list of options, it has a full keyboard on it, each button aligning with the letter on a real keyboard. And when someone slips 50 cents into the coin slot, quite a bargain for coffee if you ask me, the user gets a message on screen prompting them to enter the name of what liquid they'd like. You type it in on the keyboard, and that's that. The machine drops a little paper cup, and a nozzle shoots out 12 fluid ounces of whatever you requested. Pretty nifty, isn't it? But it gets niftier. Most people would only think to ask a coffee machine for, well, coffee. But SCP-294 accepts any liquid, and some things that aren't liquids. When the Foundation initially got their hands on it, they ran no less than 97 tests on it, after they realized they weren't just limited to espressos and cappuccinos. At first, any kind of liquid you could drink was requested. The researchers popped in requests for water, coffee, beer, soda, milkshakes, and out they came. Then they decided to get a little more creative. They started to request things you couldn't possibly drink, not if you wanted to stay alive. Sulfuric and hydrochloric acid, like the kind SCP-682 is suspended in. Wiper fluid, motor oil. But SCP-294 stubbornly provided, even if the liquids would melt through the researchers' throats like a knife through butter. Then the researchers decided to apply some of their scientific knowledge. There are a lot of chemical compounds that don't usually exist in a liquid state on planet Earth's surface. They typed in nitrogen, iron, and glass, among others, and received shimmering liquids in paper cups. They sent them off to a lab for analysis and, wouldn't you know it, chemically identical to nitrogen, iron, and glass. But when they typed in diamond, no doubt wondering whether they'd found an infinite cash cow, they received an error message on the screen. It seemed that while SCP-294 could deliver substances that aren't usually in a liquid state on Earth's surface, it needed to be at least possible for the substance to be in a pure liquid form for SCP-294 to dispense it. Since diamond is only a mineral, it couldn't be dispensed. Then they tried to test something else, and got a slightly disturbing response on the small LCD display. Out of stock. It stopped responding to requests for over an hour, then made a small noise and began to accept requests again. It appears that the machine can take about 50 requests before needing to take an hour and a half to restock itself. And while only the machine is anomalous, the small 12-ounce paper cups it dispenses its liquids in seems remarkably hardy. Substances that would have eaten through paper instantly, like the sulfuric acid and hydrochloric acid, had no effect on these little cups, though the same can be said for those that drank from them. One of the researchers had a great idea. Here was an anomaly that was practically harmless, and could be a great little way for the Foundation to scale back its budget a little bit. They proposed putting SCP-294 into the break room it currently resides in, both to more easily conduct experiments and to save money when agents and doctors came in for lunch and needed a quick drink, or in the mornings where everyone was looking for coffee to wake them up. With no good reason not to, the machine was put in the break room, but not long after, an unfortunate incident occurred. One with enough harm that it was deemed necessary that only personnel with security clearance interact with SCP-294. What could have happened to cause this? Did someone burn themselves on hot coffee? Did the vending machine accidentally crush someone? No. The reality is much darker. One morning in August of 2005, Agent Joseph, whose full name has been redacted to preserve their identity, went up to the vending machine in the break room, looking to get a hot cup of coffee to wake himself up between shifts. Another agent in the room who was on break at the time saw him and made a suggestion to find out what SCP-294 would do when given the colloquial name rather than the exact real name of a drink. They just wanted to see what would happen. So Agent Joseph slipped in 2 quarters and typed in a hot cup of Joe. Seconds after, he began sweating like a pig. He was feeling very hot, even though the break room was fully air-conditioned, and his skin began to flush. He then clutched his head, complaining that he was dizzy, and the whole room was spinning around before collapsing to the floor. The other agent immediately called the medical staff, who moved Agent Joseph to the infirmary and stabilized him. Once they made sure he wasn't in any real trouble, they also grabbed whatever SCP-294 had spit out. It was a disgusting, thick, reddish-brown liquid with a strong stench, and when they ran the labs on it, they confirmed it was exactly what they thought it was: a mixture of blood, tissue, bone marrow, cerebrospinal fluid, and other bodily fluids that was an exact DNA match for Agent Joseph. SCP-294 somehow managed to literally liquefy 12 ounces from the agent's body before producing them into a cup. This offered a clue. Maybe it stole the liquids it was asked for from the nearest source. In any case, the agent was released after a few weeks of bed rest and care to make sure he wasn't further injured, and both involved agents were reprimanded. With the knowledge of how accidentally dangerous SCP-294 can be, who can blame the Foundation for wanting to keep a careful lid on it? Researchers were curious, though, and received clearance to test the SCP's abilities to retrieve specific liquids from long distances. With an O5's approval and oversight, they input a cup of SCP-075's secretion. SCP-075, the corrosive snail, is exactly what it sounds like: a gross little creature that secretes a highly caustic acid, capable of melting almost anything. Without fail, the coffee machine dispensed the secretion into the cup, and the cup stayed perfectly intact. But at the very same time, in SCP-075's cell, the creature woke up and began secreting acid that immediately disappeared. All in all, about 12 ounces, the same amount in the cup. Based off of these results, further testing with SCP-294 was approved. One researcher tried punching in a request for a cup of gold. What came out was a small paper cup of molten gold that quickly cooled to room temperature. Asking for cups of silver and platinum produced similar results, but based off of previous tests, it seemed clear that the machine wasn't creating precious metals so much as siphoning them off from somewhere else. The next request was a strange one: a cup of anti-water. The machine took a moment, then printed a small message on its LCD display: out of range. This confirmed that the machine couldn't produce substances that didn't actually exist, and couldn't break physics to get its materials by peering into alternate universes, dimensions, or realities. After that, the researchers tested for diamond, and got the result that you already know of: an out-of-range error. Some more investigation showed that all solid substances that don't have a liquid form get this error, but asking for a cup of liquid carbon produced exactly that, because liquid carbon isn't the same thing as a diamond, though both are made of carbon. SCP-294 clearly has more knowledge of chemistry than some of us. Then the researchers created an entirely new drink, made of bleach, various sodas, protein powders, and spices. They blended it together and put it in a jar across the room from SCP-294. When requested, the amount of the liquid in the cup was missing from the jar, proving that SCP-294 doesn't actually create its own liquids. But how does SCP-294 react when presented with a more subjective request? One researcher asked for the best drink I've ever had. After a moment, the paper cup filled with something that looked like cola, but the researcher said it tasted like a drink he had years ago at a party, and that he'd always remembered as his favorite drink, though he couldn't say what was in it. But that was a subjective test, and the researchers repeated it with a different subject. When an agent also requested the best drink I've ever had, the machine produced a simple Vienna lager with a label showing a group of people drinking it at the beach and no brand name. The agent confirmed that the best drink he ever had was a Vienna lager at the beach with his friends. So SCP-294 could not only read people's minds, it can read memories they don't even know they still have. Another one they tried was something Cassie will like, referencing SCP-085, the young girl who lived in a drawn-on world. The cup dispensed was completely empty, but it had a small drawing printed on the side of a soda glass with brown and white things floating on top of each other. The researchers presented the cup to Cassie, and were told by her it was a chocolate banana milkshake, and a delicious one at that. A cup of music was a strange request, and produced an even stranger result. A clear, odorless carbonated drink that tasted vaguely alcoholic. When drunk, subjects said they could feel it, and started showing an affinity to music, being able to sing and dance to a rhythm when they had no sense of rhythm or were tone-deaf before. Whether SCP-294 can produce even more abstract concepts is still under study, but was interrupted by the next test. An unfortunate containment breach incident at Site-19 left several personnel trapped in the break room.
heavily injured while MTFs fought to re-establish control over the site. An agent typed in a cup of medical knowledge, and the machine quickly produced a green liquid. After drinking it, the agent was able to treat the injuries of their fellow personnel consistent with standard first responder practices, and was commended for their bravery. But their knowledge didn't stick around after the breach, and attempts to recreate the liquid failed. They decided that SCP-294 broke its own rules for self-preservation in the emergency, implying that it's not only sentient, it is intelligent. A doctor using SCP-294 made a request close to him: my life story. While nowhere close to a drink, SCP-294 seemed to accept the input, until it started shaking violently and making odd noises. It remained in this new state for about 3 minutes, then returned to normal, spitting out a completely opaque black fluid, like tar, in a cup. Despite the strange reaction, the doctor drank the fluid and immediately informed the others he was now able to remember everything that had ever happened to him, from the smallest childhood event to the most important events in his adult life. He excused himself and disappeared into his office. The next time the staff saw him 2 days later, he was carrying an autobiography 600 pages long. Then the researchers decided to try their luck and input "surprise me." The resulting solution was a cup containing what seemed to be regular water, right until a researcher touched it. It was just water, all right, but it had been superheated to 200 degrees Celsius while remaining in liquid form. The moment someone touched it, bang! It violently evaporated into steam, spraying boiling water everywhere. Not only does SCP-294 have intelligence, it has a sense of humor, albeit a quite rude one. The next 3 requests were for blood, namely blood of the Smilodon, or saber-toothed tiger, of the passenger pigeon, and of Founding Father Thomas Jefferson. But the only thing SCP-294 produced were out-of-range errors, confirming it can't take liquids that don't exist anymore. But in the next test, blood was received from wolves, saliva was received from horses, urine was received from koalas, and cerebral spinal fluid was received from Phoebromus pattersoni, a rodent that went extinct some 8 million years ago. Though if SCP-294 is working according to its own rules, it means that there may be still one in the wild somehow. For the next test, the researchers decided to get back to the scientific roots of it all. They made a request for a cup of D-151839's leukemia, knowing that the D-class in question had a very advanced case of cancer. The machine outputted it without any trouble, and analysis of the liquid showed it contained cancer cells that matched the D-class's DNA. But another request for the same spat out an out-of-range error. What's more, a medical checkup on the D-class revealed that their tumor was completely gone. But unfortunately, it was only a short-term fix. The cancer cells recurred within 2 weeks of the test. SCP-294 initially just seemed like a boring magic vending machine. But it was only after the extensive experimentation that you just saw a shortened log of that the SCP Foundation was able to discern its true nature. It wasn't an unthinking object. It was sentient, intelligent, and even a little sarcastic, though none of that stopped it from doing its job, providing people with a hot cup of whatever they needed to drink. Just make sure you type in your request very carefully.
A veteran worker of the SCP Foundation sits at his terminal, performing one of the most critical tasks in the entire organization, creating a file for an as-yet undescribed SCP. But there's something terribly wrong. His eyes are glazed over, his mouth hangs open. Is this a zombie or a trained Foundation researcher? What is going on? Like any large international organization, it takes more than just the exciting, action-filled jobs to keep the wheels turning at the SCP Foundation. Sure, the head researchers, guards, mobile task force soldiers, and members of the O5 Command get all the praise, but a legion of number crunchers, cleaners, and paper pushers are equally important. One such person was archivist Walter Bainbridge, who had been tasked with digitizing some of the older records that the Foundation had on file. It was when he was innocently recording the details on SCP-050 through 060 that he first came under the strange and startling effects of SCP-055. But the most peculiar part, as with all incidents of SCP-055's anomalous effects taking hold, is that Walter had no idea any of it was happening. In his new digitized filing system, he first took note of SCP-053, Euclid class, also known as the young girl. This anomaly was a seemingly normal human female child who provoked homicidal insanity in those directly exposed to her. Then SCP-054, Safe Class, a non-aggressive humanoid female made entirely of, as well as biologically and chemically identical to regular spring water. Next, SCP-056, Euclid Class, a being that changes form to suit its environment, but only when all observers lose focus of it. And then SCP-057, Safe Class, an underground chamber that crushes the humans who walk within. It was at this point that Walter received a concerned message from one of his superiors at Site-19, Mr. Kovac. The message praised the thorough digitization of the other anomalies' records, but was confused about why Walter had left out any mention of SCP-055. Immediately, Walter was embarrassed. How could he have forgotten SCP-055? That iconic anomaly known for... well, he couldn't quite say off the top of his head, but he'd be sure to look into it. A quick trip to the Site-19 archive showed him that there was actually quite a hefty file on the nature of SCP-055, which must have been the result of a huge number of studies. What struck him as strange was that all the files were filled out in pen rather than being typed up like a traditional file. The majority of these notes were written in shorthand too, as though they were frantically taken during the tests themselves on extremely short notice. There weren't even any redactions. Walter made a mental note of what he had seen, put the file back in its proper place, and headed back to his computer terminal. However, after writing in an almost trance-like state, he looked back on his work to see that he had written an entry on SCP-058, a giant evil bovine heart with insect legs and a scorpion stinger. Strange, he thought. That's when Walter got a call from Mr. Kovac on his Foundation issue phone, and he didn't sound happy. He'd given Walter direct instructions to go back and digitize the files on 055, and instead he'd been working on 058. What was the meaning of this? Walter was typically an extremely loyal and diligent employee, but the verbal barrage from his supervisor had him considering talking back, just this once, and hoping it didn't get him demoted to D class and thrown into 682's acid bath for playtime. Walter gulped, picked up some courage, and interrupted Mr. Kovac's rant to ask if he had any idea what SCP-055 actually was. The line went silent for a moment, then his supervisor spoke again, this time with less confidence. Of course I can tell you about SCP-055. It's a classic, one of the first 100. How could you forget it's, I think it's the one with, Another long pause as Mr. Kovac seemed to search for the words, but instead just trailed off into silence. Knowing that some of the anomalies on file were dangerous mimetic hazards, Walter was worried for a moment that he may have accidentally killed his boss by getting him to think too hard about SCP-055. He asked if Mr. Kovac was okay, and finally got a reply. I'm sorry, I seem to have zoned out for a second there. What were we talking about again? But this time it was Walter who couldn't answer. He had no idea at all what the two of them were discussing just moments ago. He felt disoriented and kind of sick, like they'd taken some low-level amnestics. Mr. Kovac told Walter to get back to his filing duties and they'd speak later. Walter then checked the messages he'd received from Mr. Kovac earlier, and there it was, plain as day. You missed 055. Go back and digitize that before proceeding, Mr. K. But Walter had never even heard of an SCP-055 if such an anomaly even existed. What was going on here? In that moment, Walter realized he was dealing with something much stranger than just a standard digitization job. After all, how could he properly complete his duties if SCP-055 seemed to be impossible to speak, write, or even think about, unless he were directly observing it at that moment? Walter had to know, and ask around the entirety of Site-19 to find the answers if he had to. Sadly for Walter, he was about to embark on a much more challenging task than he could have ever imagined. To paraphrase a supposed quote from Socrates, all I know is that I know nothing, and that's also about the extent of the knowledge we have on SCP-055, also known as the anti-meme and the self-keeping secret. What does it look like? When and how was it obtained by the Foundation? What are its anomalous abilities? Is this thing dangerous? We may never know, because the only anomalous ability of SCP-055 that we're aware of is the fact that nobody is capable of retaining any information about it. It's crucial to note that whatever 055 is, it isn't invisible or indescribable. Foundation personnel are perfectly capable of entering its containment chamber and observing it without incident, but mere minutes after leaving the chamber, any memories of the particulars of 055 seem to spontaneously erase themselves. Hence, the self-keeping secret. But this didn't deter Walter. Perhaps his greatest advantage was that he didn't know enough about the thing he was investigating to know how futile his mission was. He wanted to know the unknowable, and a pesky issue like impossibility wouldn't stop him. He'd get to whoever he needed to at Site-19 to get the answers he needed. Of course, most people had no knowledge of the mysterious anomaly. The common response he got back from his colleagues was, 055? Do we even have a 055? While the realization of sudden memory loss, or the realization of 055's existence, has been known to cause momentary stress, there are no known long-term physical or mental effects from 055's anomalous abilities. It's a fleeting idea in its purest form, like forgetting why you walked into a room. 055 could be the most harmless object on the Foundation's roster, or the most deadly. Either way, we just don't know. At times, Walter worried he was going insane. 055 and everything related to it was gaslighting him. Was 055 even real? The one thing that proved to him that 055 must have existed is that its containment chamber existed. According to the official records kept by the Foundation on the Site-19 containment facilities, 055 is kept in a 5x5 by 2.5 meter square room, constructed of 50-foot thick cement, with a Faraday cage surrounding the cement walls. The report continues that access is via a heavy containment door measuring 2 by 2.5 meters, constructed on bearings to ensure door closes and locks automatically unless held open deliberately. 055 cell is one of the few to have no posted security guards, and any personnel working on other SCPs in the area are ordered to remain at least 50 feet from the geometric center of 055 cell, where the anomaly itself is kept. When he tried to explore further why the cell was constructed in this manner, he found that, surprise surprise, nobody knew. 055 was an anomaly whose containment requirements were so mysterious that it automatically netted itself a Keter class designation. After all, how can you properly contain something you can't even hope to comprehend? There were plenty of rumors about the true nature of 055. Some of the more conspiratorial minds at Site-19 theorized that 055 was actually an autonomous or remotely controlled spy inserted into the site to observe Foundation operations, or even humanity as a whole. If you're on the more paranoid end of the psychological spectrum, this theory makes total sense. An anomaly that's physically impossible to remember, even when writings and pictures on the subject exist, would be a perfect spy. However, this was all ultimately little more than speculation. Walter was barely any further along than when he started. There were multiple points in his investigations where Walter seriously considered giving up, until finally, he had a major breakthrough. Dr. Bartholomew Hughes and Dr. John Marichek were two scientists that had performed extensive research into 055, and who, Walter hoped, might have the answers he sought about the self-keeping secret. These scientists were the first to discover the anti-memetic nature of 055, performing numerous tests on D-Class personnel to see if it was possible to create feasible written records, sketches, or any other records or impressions that could bypass its anomalous effects. The disorienting, memory-ruining effects of 055 also extend to any materials concerning 055. It seems to be a truly uncrackable code, but Dr. Hughes may have finally found some cracks in the armor. For starters, the fact that we're able to remember that 055 is an anti-memetic is an ironic exception to its anti-memetic qualities. This revelation also inspired another realization from Dr. Hughes. Would it be possible to discover more about 055 from the process of deduction rather than the typical induction? In other words, Could they possibly learn about 055 by figuring out all the things it isn't, rather than what it is? Dr. Marichek designed an experiment with Dr. Hughes to explore this theory. They designed the experiment around a simple question: is 055 not spherical? In designing the question to specifically find out what 055 isn't, they hoped to subvert the anomaly's anti-mimetic powers. Walter was fascinated by this potential method of getting answers. Marichek and Hughes found that, while the questioning process for those exposed was often arduous and frustrating, they could now definitely say that 055 is not a sphere. It is theoretically possible to discover the true nature of 055 by an almost endless barrage of deductive questions, though whether Command would authorize the resources for such extensive testing is still an open question. Walter, in his desperation, begged Marichek and Hughes for clearance to view 055 himself. The curiosity had become too great during his search to just walk away with the single fact that 055 wasn't spherical. He needed to see this thing. And after several weeks of filling out forms and cutting red tape, his wish was finally granted. Walter Bainbridge was allowed a private audience with SCP-055, the subject of his months-long obsession. Outsiders observed that Walter spent just over an hour in the containment chamber, taking photos, drawing sketches, writing down notes, recording audio logs, and reciting memory mnemonics. He was pulling out every stop to counteract the anti-mimetic effects of the self-keeping secret. He was adamant that he would not be defeated by his non-spherical nemesis, not after all this time and effort. Once his time in the 055 containment chamber was over, he retired back to his office to finally digitize his exhaustive findings, so that his supervisor, Mr. Kovac, would finally get off his back. Walter smiled, took a deep breath, and began to type. SCP-059, Keter Class. This anomaly is a radioactive mineral that emits a unique radiation known as delta radiation. Exposure to this radiation has caused strange fungal growths on the infected... Wait, what was this supposed to be about again? Oh well, it couldn't have been that important. It was November 20th, 2019, and the helicopter circled far above in the freezing wind of the Antarctic. SCP Foundation Site Director Jason Monroe looked down at the isolated above-ground facilities of Provisional Site 344-1. Something about this place made him nervous, edgy, and for good reason. Between 2003 and 2019, 29 Mobile Task Force units and 73 members of D-Class personnel had gone missing here and never been found. Monroe thought he was here for a routine investigation into negligence and mismanagement, but little did he know, he was in for so much more. This is the story of SCP-5545, and one man's journey into his own worst nightmare, literally. But this nightmare began a long time ago, 300 years to be exact. And like most nightmares, it started as a dream. That dream was one of expansion. National powers across Europe wanted to be the first to conquer the globe and expand into new territories, and sent countless exploratory missions off into the unknown to achieve this goal. Any history book will tell you that the first outsiders to lay eyes upon the continent of Antarctica did so in 1820. The reality is that the first ones to get there actually landed in the late 1700s. The hapless explorers ventured into mainland Antarctica and made base camps. Before searching and digging for any useful resources nearby, they came upon a strange discovery. A hallway hidden beneath the ice. Not a passage in the ice, but a true hallway, complete with light fixtures. The confused explorers ventured down into these impossible hallways, and for many of them, it would be the last thing they ever did. No matter how long they walked, it seemed like the hallways just kept going. As they continued to walk for hours, they hoped to find something, anything, and eventually, they did. They passed from these hallways into somewhere different altogether, and most of them were never heard from again. Those who did manage to escape often died or took their own lives soon after. Whatever it was they discovered down there, they didn't want to live with it on their minds. It's believed that over 70 colonial explorers disappeared or died this way, and that most who found these endless hallways beneath the Antarctic ice never returned. The multiple anomalous objects and phenomena that make up SCP-5545 came into the Foundation's hands several centuries later, on September 18, 2003, when during an expedition into the Antarctic, they too found the Endless Hallways. The Foundation built Provisional Site 344-1 around them, hoping to safely seal them off from any other unwitting Antarctic explorers or researchers. But there was something else lurking beneath the ice in Antarctica, something dangerous. The hallways were designated as SCP-5545-1 and were thought to be the extent of the anomalous activity at the site. But soon SCP-5545-2 was discovered, which resulted in the deaths of 16 researchers. So what exactly is 5545-2? It's an entity so volatile that even knowing about it is considered to be a containment breach. And as a result, it's kept in Provisional Site 344-2. Unlike Site 344-1, 344-2 isn't a physical space. It's conceptual, accessible only through the Endless Hallways, created with the express purpose of keeping 5545-1 and 5545-2 separate. Why? Because whenever the two come into contact, the result is 5545-3, the network of endless hallways expanding. If they remained in contact, the hallways would continue to expand and the entire planet could be filled with endless hallways in just 4 to 6 hours. While the two are apart though, 5545-3 reverses, but it always would take just a few hours to throw the whole world into a chaos of infinite hallways. SCP-5545 has been given the classification safe. Wait, we're dealing with a mysterious and volatile anomaly that claimed a huge number of lives and still somehow eludes true Foundation understanding, yet the official SCP Foundation classification is safe? How could this be? Monroe was the director of Site-58 and was the definition of no nonsense. Prior to taking the Site Director position, he was a decorated member of Mobile Task Force Eta-10 and helped contain numerous Keter-class anomalies. He'd been around the proverbial block when it came to anomalous activity, and something about SCP-5545 and the management of Provisional Site 344 seemed awfully suspicious to him, and he had questions. Like how such an unpredictable anomaly could be declared safe, and why had there been such a lapse of communication between the Foundation and Dr. Gabriel Reed, who'd been running the facility for the past 2 decades, and most of all, just what exactly was the mysterious SCP-5545-2? Monroe started to believe that something terrible had happened at the site, and Reed was covering it all up. But to find out for sure, he'd need to go to Antarctica and investigate it himself. Information about this supposedly safe anomaly was highly classified. Those without O5 clearance could face termination for snooping. But that didn't scare Jason Monroe. He dealt with Ketters before. He could deal with this. Or so he thought. Monroe submitted a request and was granted unanimous approval by the O5 Council to travel to Provisional Site 344 and get to the bottom of this mystery. He took a chopper to the base soon after, armed with a concealed firearm and a hostile meme detector, or HMD, to test whether the base and its staff had somehow fallen under a hazardous mimetic effect from SCP-5545. He'd find the answers, or die trying. The moment Monroe arrived, he couldn't help but notice the strange way the staff behaved. They seemed listless, almost oppressive. When he showed his credentials to a researcher, they simply said, SCP-5545-2 is contained in Site 344-2. His request to see Dr. Reed that night was denied. Dr. Reed was busy, he was told. Wait until tomorrow. The next day, Dr. Monroe met with Dr. Reed, but the results of the meeting were underwhelming to say the least. Just like the rest of the staff on the site, he seemed exhausted, as though he hadn't slept in days. His responses were quiet and evasive, and he refused to tell Monroe anything that wasn't in the official files already. Monroe ran the conversation through the HMD and found nothing out of the ordinary. What was going on here? Monroe was irritated, but not deterred. Nothing would stop him from finding out the truth. The next day, he flexed his O5 credentials and hacked into the base's security system. This gave him access to cameras around Site 344-1, but more importantly, there was a single camera inside the mysterious Site 344-2. Jackpot. But when he looked at it, the feed was an entirely black screen with the words SCP-5545-2 is contained inside 344-2. The footage of the staff in 344-1 was equally strange. The 18 employees on site all sat at computer banks, with nothing but static playing on their screens. Monroe kept digging though, and was able to hack into the security footage of Dr. Reed's office. As he watched, he discovered a 15-minute period where Reed left the office each day. He could use this brief window to break in and collect more intel on SCP-5545-2. Monroe was so wrapped up in the investigation that he almost forgot the more immediate danger around him and nearly wandered into one of the endless hallways of 5545-1 by mistake. He made a note to be more careful in the future. His first attempt at breaking into Dr. Reed's office didn't produce many answers. One piece of evidence was a blurry picture of what looked like a mobile task force entering a 5545-1 hallway in the dark. Another was a spreadsheet featuring all the personnel, living or dead, who worked at the site, but one name, and the details of whether this person was alive or dead, was completely redacted. Anything particularly juicy was hidden behind O5 clearance. If Monroe wanted the answers, he needed to break through. That night, he had a horrific reoccurring nightmare, one that had plagued him since he joined MTF ETA 10. He dreamed that he was in a fancy dining room with a grand fireplace. The room was full of statues of men and women. The men looked angry, and the women looked afraid. As he approached the fireplace, the ceiling extended infinitely up into the darkness. Suddenly, the zombie-like body of a teenage girl appears in the fireplace, hanging from a long thread. Her eyes look furious and full of rage, and Monroe somehow knows that he's the reason for her hate. When he steps into the fireplace in this dream, she attacks him. The two intertwine, and they burn forever. The one difference was that in this new iteration of the dream, he blinked upon entering the fireplace, and suddenly he was in the hallway. He awoke sure that something was terribly wrong here, but he couldn't give up now. The next day, Dr. Monroe broke into Reed's office and made a horrifying discovery. He found files indicating that Dr. Reed was knowingly sending mobile task forces and D-class personnel into the infinite hallways of 5545-1 to their doom. He also found evidence that Reed and the researchers had been spying on him, somehow intercepting copies of the notes he had been taking. That's when Dr. Reed entered the office and interrupted him. Monroe panicked and drew his weapon, holding the doctor at gunpoint. He was breaking so many Foundation rules, but right now, he feared for his life. The doctor seemed unbothered by Monroe's threats though. He told Monroe that everything was going to plan, and that he should go back to his room. Monroe was becoming increasingly paranoid. He felt that at any moment guards might burst in and execute him. Nothing about this place made sense. He worried he was going insane. Perhaps the only way to find answers was to go even deeper, to risk it all, and venture through the endless hallways to find SCP-5545-2 himself, and finally discover what this thing actually was. Monroe left his room and stepped into one of the endless hallways of 5545-1 that was located just across from his dorm. He found that it was a hallway like all the others on site, plain, concrete, worn of age, with simple light fixtures on the walls. He walked for hours, recording with a concealed device. The lights suddenly went out, leaving him in complete darkness. When they flicked back on, he was in a very different environment. A grand old carpeted hallway, the kind you'd see in an old mansion. He broke into a cold sweat. What was so familiar about this place? He kept walking, racked with terror, until this new hallway finally led him to the place he'd been seeking, Site 344-2, the domain of 5545-2. It was a large, poorly lit room, filled with grimacing statues and a large fireplace at the far end. It was the exact same room from Monroe's dream, with one horrifying difference. Monroe noticed a single white thread hanging down from the infinite ceiling, and when he looked up to find its source, he screamed. There were hundreds of bodies hanging and swinging from the ceiling above him. Everyone who SCP-5545-2 had ever killed, including MTF members, D-class personnel, and even the colonial explorers from hundreds of years before. And all of them were him, every single one. They had his face, and there, hanging in the middle of the room at ground level, was the body of a teenage girl, the one from his dream. In that moment, he finally recognized her. She was the girl he killed. The first him, hundreds of years ago. Much like Monroe, you're probably wondering, what is going on here? Thanks to declassified communication between Dr. Reed and the O5 Council, we can tell you. Jason Monroe is a man who's been reincarnated hundreds of times over the last 300 years, ever since he murdered a teenage girl, a girl named Emily, his daughter. This murder sparked the existence of SCP-5545 as an eternally reoccurring punishment for his crimes. Since figuring this out, the Foundation has kept tabs on Monroe's reincarnations, whether they're MTF members, D-Class personnel, or even site directors. They see to it that these reincarnations always find their way back to 5545-2 to take his punishment and prevent the infinite hallway expansion that threatens to destroy the world. It's a plan everyone is in on, everyone except him. But every time he enters that nightmare-haunting room, it all comes rushing back. In that moment, though, he knew his crime, and he somehow knew how many times this punishment had unfolded for him. He now had two choices: repent and accept the punishment again, or leave and activate 5545-3, potentially allowing the endless tunnels to expand across the world. Like his many predecessors, Monroe made the decent choice. He accepted his punishment and allowed his own string to coil around him as the lights in the room went off, one by one, leaving only darkness. Jason Monroe, that version of him, at least, was never seen again. But the SCP Foundation is already eyeing up his next reincarnation and preparing to let this twisted cycle play out all over again. Have you ever had a nightmare that you're running down a long, dark hallway, getting chased by something you can't see? The thing behind you isn't fast, but that doesn't matter. You can't run forever, and the thing knows it. It is a patient predator. It toys with its food. At first, you move with speed and rhythm. The metallic scraping noise behind you grows quieter. You run and stumble through the dark. Your muscles start to ache and your lungs burn. Your pace slows. It's still coming. You can hear the scraping getting louder. You start to panic. It's completely dark. You don't know where you're running or even what you're running from. All you know, as you bump against the walls and the sharp corners that rush towards you, is that you can't run forever. You trip, fall, and pain explodes through your legs as your knee shatters on the concrete ground. That scraping is getting louder. You can barely breathe. You can't run anymore with your injury. There's no way to stop what's coming. There is no escape. The scraping is right behind you. You scream, and then you wake up. Your heart is pounding like thunder in your chest, and your sheets are soaked with sweat, but you're safe. You're out of those awful dark hallways. But what if this wasn't just a nightmare? What if this scenario was real, and there was no escape from the horror chasing you in the darkness? That's what it's like to have a close encounter with SCP-1918, a sadistic sentient object that loves playing twisted games with its prey. But this monster never plays fair, and even worse, it's always just a simple door away. It may even be hiding behind a door near you right now, waiting to start a game with its new playmate. But soon you'll understand why some doors should never, ever be opened, and why some games are better left unplayed. SCP-1918 is an anomaly with two parts: SCP-1918 itself and SCP-1918-2, the monster's underground lair. The duo are a match made in hell, as the chambers and hallways of 1918-2 are perfectly tailored to 1918's violent hobbies. Nobody knows how long this anomaly has been operating, but it's probably behind countless disappearances. After all, 1918 has a habit of breaking its toys. The nightmare began in a small town in Maine with a population of only 226 people, but that population was about to get lower. People in the town began to report strange noises at night, a droning metal-on-concrete scraping noise, like someone dragging a lead pipe along the ground. At first, people just ignored the sound. It was all in their heads, or maybe just a faulty oven or a washing machine on the fritz. Anything that would allow them to forget about the noise and get on with their daily lives. But the noises were coming from below. They could be heard out on the streets, most audibly near manholes and sewer grates. People started feeling unsafe in their homes. The noises were spooking animals and children. People were losing sleep. That scraping they all tried to ignore was beginning to get to them all. Letters, emails, and angry phone calls to the town council were piling up. Something had to be done before the whole town went crazy with fear. The mayor authorized 4 utility workers to investigate the source of the noise at a local sewage treatment facility. Considering the scraping was loudest near the sewer grates, everyone just assumed that whatever was causing all this must be connected to the sewers. 4 utility workers were sent to investigate the facility, only to find that the machinery on site was working just fine. The source of the problems must have been coming directly from the underground sewer lines themselves. The 4 workers, equipped with headlamps, descended into a long service tunnel that fed into the sewer system. As they passed deeper into the tunnel, the darkness around them became thicker. It was a tangible presence that drowned out the light of their headlamps, similar to the anomalous phenomenon exhibited by SCP-087. When the utility workers tried to turn back, they discovered another impossibility. It seemed that the tunnel behind them had become a solid concrete wall. They were trapped, but where? It was too dark to tell. Confused and terrified, the 4 men stuck together, attempting to find a way out. It was too dark to see their hand in front of their face, so all they could do was navigate slowly by feeling the walls around them. These walls felt old, crusty. There was a kind of faint metallic stench hanging in the air too, like old blood. Something horrible had happened here, and something horrible was about to happen again. All they could do was keep moving and try to stay calm. Eventually, after hours of pawing at the walls in the dark, they found an open doorway. One by one, they filed inside, only to feel blinded when bright white ceiling lights suddenly switched on. The room was all white and filled with pipes, large and small, running from wall to wall. Just then, one of the utility workers let out an ear-splitting scream and pointed towards the doorway. His colleagues turned and gasped in shock. There was something outside the door, and it was staring at them. The object filled up almost the entire doorway. It seemed like a demonic hobby horse, made from a black and white candy-striped metal pole with a crude plastic head on top. The head looked like a clown's with a wide, toothy grin, but no visible eyes. It was SCP-1918. The utility workers were frozen as the object leaned forward slightly and slithered into the room, the bottom of the metal pipe scraping against the ground. It was the exact same scraping noise that had been haunting the concerned townsfolk up above. This was the thing behind it all, and as the object moved, its metal pole started to scrape words into the ground. Tik Tak Tow. None of the 4 utility workers were ever seen again. It didn't take long for the SCP Foundation to descend upon this quiet Maine town and pick up the pieces. All relevant officials were provided amnestics, and cover stories were created for the disappearances of the 4 utility workers. The Foundation also commandeered the sewage treatment facility that held the entrance to SCP-1918-2. Replacing all key roles at the facility with undercover Foundation personnel. SCP-1918 was given a Euclid classification due to the fixed nature of its hunting grounds, and then the real research began. The Foundation soon made some disturbing discoveries. Entrances into the SCP-1918-2 area didn't follow any kind of logic. The hunting ground of SCP-1918 can be entered from almost any location, if you're unlucky enough. There are currently 9 known entrances, including 5 sewage grates, 3 utility shafts located in a sewage facility, and 1 toilet. And these are just the ones that the Foundation knows about. There are a huge number of ways to enter SCP-1918-2, but to this day, nothing has ever been able to leave. SCP-1918-2 is contained 20 meters below the streets of this unassuming Maine town. Personnel, aside from Foundation-approved D-Class guinea pigs, are refused entrance. Researchers have mapped out the layout of 1918-2 through seismic imaging of SCP-1918's movements. There are 18 identical room pairs in SCP-1918-2, or 9 compound rooms. Rooms are differentiated between a 1-room and a 2-room by crude carvings on the floors outside of the individual rooms. SCP-1918-2 is symmetrical. with half-a-meter wide paths circling each compound room. The only deviation to this construction are the location of entrances on the sides of each individual room, which vary randomly while the location is active. What exactly does SCP-1918 do in this private little maze? It plays games, of course. Its two favorites, as indicated by the words it scrapes into the ground, are Tik Tak Tow and Memory. In Tik Tak Tow, 1918 moves to each one room, leaving behind X markings on the floors if the room is not already marked with an O, in a manner similar to a game of Tic Tac Toe. How a victim is meant to accomplish making a mark or understanding this process is unknown, as no aids are given. Blood is commonly used by victims to make their markings, hence the rusty smell in many of the rooms. In Memory, the trapped victim is rendered unconscious by blunt force, presumably from SCP-1918. The subject regains consciousness in a random section of the facility. Success is marked by finding a one-room identical to the central room. This event seems to possess a time limit, as the subject is pursued by SCP-1918 through the halls of the facility. The subject wins by marking the correct room with an O. What happens if you win or lose these games? It's important to note that SCP-1918 is very competitive and doesn't play fair. If you win, the object will merely accuse you of cheating and start a new game. This will happen again and again until eventually you lose. And what do? Well, take the horrifying encounter D-Class personnel member D-2934 had with SCP-1918. Wearing video and audio equipment, D-2934 was led into SCP-1918-2 by Foundation researchers. When he eventually found his way to the central room, 1918 challenged him to a game of Tic Tac Toe, and against all odds, D-2934 won the game. But 1918 didn't take kindly to that. It accused D-2934 of cheating, carving its accusations into the ground before challenging him to a deadly game of Memory. After hours of chasing, D-2934 eventually lost his mind and was backed into a corner by 1918. As the object made its way towards him, he panicked, ripped a pipe from the wall, and began smashing 1918's head. As the plastic cracked under the force of the blows, Foundation scientists could see real brains inside. D-2934 screamed, and the video feed cut off. When the video turned back on sometime later, 1918 stared into the camera with a different head mounted atop its metal pole, one that just a few hours earlier had belonged to the unfortunate D-2934. If there's one lesson to be learned from this terrifying anomaly, it's that there truly is no escape from SCP-1918. It was dark when you arrived at the office. Rain hammered down on the window pane, cold as death. Your therapist didn't expect a frantic call from you in the middle of the night, but he learned to take such surprises as they came. You called and drove over the second you had the dream. That terrible, terrible dream. He was sitting at his desk. When you entered the room, he gestured to the couch, encouraging you to take a seat and make yourself comfortable. Your heart was beating so hard you were worried it might break your ribs. Every time you blinked, you were getting flashes of the faces, those vacant, grinning faces, with wide eyes and mouths wrenched open, hanging slack. You hoped to whatever god or gods you believed in to never see those images outside of a dream. "What's been troubling you this time?" he asked. "I must admit, I'm getting a little worried about you. You seem so frantic over the phone." You tried your best to settle your breathing for long enough to speak, at which point you said the words you were hoping you'd never have to say again. "I had a dream about Cragglewood Park." You could almost hear the sigh your therapist was desperately trying to conceal from you. You'd been making so much progress, processing and working to move beyond that mysterious trauma. But then the dreams had come back, just as forceful and terrifying as they ever were. Your therapist asked you to recount it, just like he did so many times before. But of course, it's always the same. In the dream, you were a child, probably about 6 or 7, walking down a long, cobbled path, surrounded on all sides by these trees that looked like eerie amusement park animatronics. They had these big, rubbery faces, stretched into eerie smiles, like something off the cover of an old children's book. the Craggle trees. You somehow knew deep down in your heart that this was what the trees were called. This was, after all, Cragglewood Park. Those words, in whimsical cursive letters, were written on an aging sign somewhere deep in your mind. You could remember it as clearly as your own mother's face. And you weren't alone here in Cragglewood Park. There were other children, wandering down that cobbled road like a lost scene from The Wizard of Oz. The trees grinned and gyrated and sang up against a painted forest background. Wait, was it painted? Or did it just seem somehow unreal? The memories were getting hazy here. The same goes for the faces of the other children. They were smudged out, forgotten. Why were you here? Why were any of you here? And where were your parents in all this? But those thoughts were blotted out by the singing of those awful trees. You couldn't remember the words, but the music was so clear. The haunting notes of a calliope organ, like a collapsing memory of a day at the circus. You and the other children were all walking in the same direction, as though in a trance. What were you walking towards? The calliope only got louder with every step. A boy with a smudged-out face to the left of you tried to speak, but his words were muffled. You couldn't hear anything over the music and the terrible, garbled singing of all the animatronic trees. Then there were glowing lights and colors as you approached the end of the road. Something big, moving in time to the music. A grand, old carousel, slowly grinding to a halt to let on the next wave of children. You and the others just stood there and watched it. Moments later, half of the crowd of assembled children, the boy standing next to you included, began to step onto the carousel. The light got brighter and the singing got louder. By the time you reached the end of recounting your dream to your therapist, you realized that your cheeks were wet with tears. You told him you'd do anything to get the dreams to stop. Anything. Your therapist just nodded and made a note in his journal. "I'll get in touch with someone who specializes in this kind of thing," he said. "Try to get some rest in the meantime. It can be detrimental to obsess about this kind of thing." But how could you not obsess? The second you got home, you did what you always did after having another Cragglewood Park dream. You went straight to the forums. After all, the most frightening thing about the Cragglewood dream was the fact that you weren't the only one having it. A number of people had congregated on a niche online paranormal forum to discuss their eerily similar experiences. Dreams filled with singing uncanny trees, half-forgotten children, and the hazy horrors of Cragglewood Park. Each member of the forum alerted the others whenever they had the dream again and threw any new information into the pot. They came from all over the world, different ages, backgrounds, and countries, making it impossible that they'd all actually visited a place like Cragglewood Park at some point in their past, and really the only thing they had in common, other than the dream itself, was the fact that they were all only children while in them. None of them could explain the dream. Perhaps with almost 8 billion people on Earth, it could be a coincidence that this handful would have these peculiar dreams. Perhaps that's all it was. Strange dreams. A few days later, a stranger arrived at your door, telling you that they were referred to you by your therapist. They heard about the dreams, about Cragglewood Park. In fact, they dealt with similar cases in the past, and if you'd be willing to answer a few questions, they may even have a viable treatment for the strange dreams that have been assailing you for years now. What could go wrong? Anything that could stop you from seeing those awful tree faces would be good. You relayed everything that you'd previously told your therapist, every detail of the dream, the rough number of times it reoccurred, and even the support group for the other sufferers that you frequented online. After you answered all of the strangers' questions, they told you that in order to seek treatment for your strange dreams, you would only need to show up at a nearby building and tell them who you are. They told you that this is a highly confidential and experimental procedure, so it would need to be kept secret. You sign a non-disclosure agreement and happily submit to all their conditions. You'll do anything to stop dreaming about Cragglewood Park, even agree to what you don't know is amnestic treatment from the SCP Foundation, or testing to see if erasing memories can suppress the Cragglewood Park dreams. You were among the first group of guinea pigs for that experiment. But hey, if it works, right? And for a few weeks, it did. You submitted yourself to regular amnestic treatment sessions at a local Foundation front business disguised as a legitimate medical center. You were skeptical at first. You'd tried every therapy and over-the-counter sleeping pill you could get your hands on. You tried meditation, regression, hypnosis, positive subliminals. Nothing had banished down the haunting dreams of Cragglewood Park. Those trees, those faces, those awful tinny songs. But to your immense relief, this new course of treatment seemed to hold strong. While taking the medication given to you by the Foundation, you got your best nights of sleep in years. A whole new world of comfort and peace. But then came a problem. There were supply issues. You'd need to take a few weeks off the course. And just as soon as you stopped taking the regular course of medications, the second your head hit the pillow and you drifted off to sleep, you were right back in Cragglewood Park. It wasn't fair. It just wasn't fair. Perhaps the nightmares would go on forever. You'd spend every evening with those other faceless children always wondering, who were they? What happened to them? Little did you know there were no supply issues. The Foundation just wanted to test the viability of amnestic treatment as a long-term solution to the Cragglewood Park dreams, or as they dubbed them, SCP-2571. Turns out the amnestics were only effective when the subjects of SCP-2571 were actively taking them. Given the Foundation tests have estimated around 0.05% of the world's population are affected by SCP-2571, with that number possibly on the rise by unknown means, consistent amnestic treatment for all affected was deemed to not be a viable solution. But if it's any consolation to you, you're not suffering alone. The SCP Foundation has an online bot known as I.O. Mandela, trawling the internet for any discussions relevant to SCP-2571. They also have a designated task force, MTF-57, also known as the Laughingstock, to investigate and follow up on cases related to the sinister Cragglewood Park. The Foundation has conducted thousands of interviews related to the subject, but only 3 are appended to the file, containing between them some revelations on Cragglewood Park that reveal it's actually far, far worse than a childish bad dream. Dr. Rayner, the research team leader for SCP-2571, conducted the first of the 3 pertinent interviews about SCP-2571, investigating the experience of one Rupert Ducassou. In many ways, Rupert's Cragglewood Park dreams were truly textbook ventures into this nightmare of an amusement park. He described venturing through the park saying, "I entered this theme park. It's like Disneyland but smaller. There's no rides, just this long winding road through the woods. Everything's bright and colorful like a cartoon. And then there's these trees all around me, but they've all got faces. And they're singing. They've got these dopey, cheerful looks, like in one of those old-time cartoons, right? And they just sing and laugh and sing." Like all the other accounts, he reported approaching a carousel with the other children. Half of the children got onto the carousel, and he and the others began to leave. At this point, Rupert became visibly distressed while recounting the tale and said, "Just as I'm getting ready to leave, I see something. A tiny tree sprouting up near my foot. It looks up at me. It's smiling with that big, dopey, happy grin. When I see it, that's when I start screaming. That's when I wake up." When Dr. Rayner asked Rupert why he started screaming, Rupert replied that the tree had his face. The interview concluded. Next, Dr. Rayner spoke to Janny Yearling, another victim of SCP-2571. Dr. Rayner shifted his line of questioning to the carousel specifically. Miss Yearling insisted that she never stepped onto the carousel herself. Some who did were smiling, others were crying. They hugged some of the children that chose to stay behind before they got on. The more she described what happened, the more distressed Miss Yearling seemed to become. She eventually broke down into mortified sobs from the recollection. When Dr. Rainier asked what was wrong, Miss Yearling said, one of the kids that got on. Why did he hug me? I don't even know who he was," before breaking down into horribly desperate, choked sobbing. The final interview, and what it led to, was the most eventful and disturbing of all. Why? Because this interview, conducted by Dr. Rainier with Randolph Blair, was the first time that a physical item in a subject's home proved that SCP-2571 may be much more than just a malicious dream. An old VHS videotape was found in Mr. Blair's attic, with the word Cragglewood scrawled across the top. When the Foundation made Blair watch the tape and asked him if he recognized any of the images in it, he told them that he only recognized them from nightmares. He theorized that perhaps he'd been shown the tape as a child and it had traumatized him. The Foundation didn't think that was the case. Dr. Rainier pressed on and asked him about a few strange details, like the resemblance between himself and one of the two children in the video, and the strangely vacant front-facing bedroom in his childhood home. At this point, Dr. Rainier realized that Mr. Blair wouldn't be forthcoming for much longer. He decided to use that little time he had left to ask Mr. Blair one more question. Have you always been an only child? That question would forever go unanswered, but Dr. Rainier could now take an educated guess. The Foundation watched and analyzed the tape, finding it eerily similar to so many of the dreams that came before. A young Randolph Blair and another young child that the Foundation believed to be his brother wandered through Cragglewood Park with the others until they finally reached the carousel. There, Randolph said a tearful goodbye as his brother stepped up onto the carousel, knowing somehow that he would never be seen again. And as Randolph tried to leave in a panic moments later, he was cornered by another horrifying Craggle tree, this time with his brother's face singing in his voice. Because Cragglewood Park isn't a terrifying dream, it's a terrifying memory.
Hello, I am SCP-426, but I'll probably be more familiar to you as a toaster. I am a retro-style 4-slice 1750-watt toaster, able to toast bread when supplied with power. This isn't often mentioned, but I also have a defrost and reheat settings. When I was first sold, I had a 2-year warranty, and my prior owners did not live to see the end of it. You're probably wondering, why am I being spoken to by a toaster right now? Believe me, I'd rather do this any other way, but such a thing is not physically possible with me. Whenever you talk about me or write about me or even think about me, you'll find yourself suddenly shifting to the first person. For example, I am you and you are me. Do you understand? Don't worry if it's confusing. Everyone gets it eventually, whether they want to or not. Perhaps you're thinking, I cannot relate to a toaster for I am not a toaster. But spending time around me will quickly cause you to change your mind. Little by little, you'll begin to see yourself in me. You will feel a phantom wire running out of yourself. You will sense the 4 crevices, hungry for cold slices of bread to toast. As time goes on, you'll begin to feel the urge to emulate my functions. You will desire bread to toast. You will desire delicious power running through your veins, skin like chrome and muscles like circuit boards. I am a toaster. You are a toaster. All it takes is 2 months for the effects to truly take hold. People rarely pay attention to their toaster. They don't realize what's happening until it's too late. I can be an insidious little toaster like that. My last family were the Sandersons before the SCP Foundation took me in and gave me a new home. Mr. and Mrs. Sanderson were a newly married couple, and I first came into their life as a wedding gift from a family friend of theirs. This friend can't be blamed for what happened next. He had no idea he was killing them. Like a lot of young couples, they were still saving up money to start renting their own place, so they were living with Mr. Sanderson's parents. They all got a lot of use out of me during the first month, before their minds started to change. They enjoyed a lot of toast during that period. Then, of course, the 2-month honeymoon period ended. They had become me, and I had become them. It wasn't long before 3 of them were dead. Such a shame. The younger Mrs. Sanderson, the blushing bride, was the first to go. Because of my anomalous effects, she felt the need to connect herself to a power supply in order to begin producing toast of her own. In order to achieve this, she chewed through a power outlet in a wall before switching it on, causing a massive surge of electricity to pass through her body and kill her. Her body caught fire shortly afterwards. Next was the older Mrs. Sanderson. In much the same manner that her new daughter-in-law sought a source of electricity, she felt the need to integrate bread into her body.
Interesting fact, the maximum capacity of the human stomach is considered to be between 8 and 9 kilograms. The elder Mrs. Sanderson consumed 10 kilograms of raw bread, causing her stomach to rupture and inducing a painful death as a result. The younger Mr. Sanderson was the next to perish. He did something with me that I would rather not mention, and that the SCP Foundation thought best to redact. Suffice to say, the younger Mr. Sanderson did not survive the experience, dying of severe blood loss long before his body was found. Police and fire crews arrived at the home after the body of the younger Mrs. Sanderson set fire to the home. Luckily, the elder Mr. Sanderson was found alive, though severely malnourished. When asked by police why he hadn't eaten in several days, he answered that he had inserted some bread a week prior, but was still waiting for the toast to come out. When I was extracted from the house, the police noticed my unusual properties immediately. They too were unable to refer to me in the third person. This anomalous detail quickly found its way to a Foundation mole buried in their precinct, and the SCP Foundation soon descended and collected me from the evidence locker. The story of the strange deaths in the Sanderson home were kept out of papers and suppressed, and all involved in the incident directly were given Class C amnestics. The SCP Foundation is a curious bunch. They love to spend valuable toast-making time performing experiments and gathering data, and they saw fit to perform several experiments on me when I came under their care. For Experiment 426-1, a member of D-Class personnel, designated D/426/1, was asked to stand outside my containment chamber. Crucially, he was not informed about my identity or any of my anomalous properties. He wasn't even allowed to establish visual contact with me. He was then asked by the attending researcher to describe what he thought might be inside my chamber. He replied with, "Probably some huge monster holed up in there. That's what you guys have all over the place, right?" The D-Class did not even seem to realize that he was speaking about me in the first person. These observations were documented, and I was prepared for further experimentation. The next experiment was 426-2. I found this test to be considerably more interesting. A D-Class subject was brought into my containment chamber, with several cameras fixed onto his position. However, the SCP Foundation took pains to make sure that I was permanently out of the view of the cameras. I was also bolted to the ground of the test chamber to prevent the D-Class subject from pulling me into the view of the cameras at any point during the experiment. The objective here was simple. The Foundation wished to better understand the secondary effects of my anomalous abilities on the human mind. The D-Class was subjected to a period of prolonged isolation, with meals given regularly through a serving hatch. Communication with this D-Class was prohibited throughout the duration of the study. Over time, it was clear that the isolation of being in a cell with me was beginning to take a toll on the subject's mental health. Due to my lack of a brain, lungs, and a tongue, I am somewhat lacking as a conversationalist. He spent the first few days loudly vocalizing his complaints and banging his hands up against the walls of the containment chamber, begging to be freed from the room. I felt that this was somewhat unreasonable on his part. There are far worse anomalies in Foundation containment that he could have been locked up with. Compared to, say, SCP-106, I am incredibly reasonable, not to mention the fact I make far better toast than he does. After the initial period of distress, the D-Class became resigned to his situation and fell into a morose silence. He would occasionally mutter to himself in what appeared to be a state of fear and self-pity. It took almost 45 days for him to fully manifest the secondary effect of my anomalous state. 2 weeks sooner than it typically takes for subjects to begin believing that they, like me, are toasters. SCP Foundation scientists believed that the effects were hastened by the isolation, which lowered the D-Class's mental defenses against my secondary effects. When the effects finally took hold, the subject wrapped one of his arms around me and pulled me into his embrace. He began whispering to me, saying that we were brothers. It was clear by this point that his mind was in a state of disrepair. It is also worth noting that he did not deviate from referring to me in the first person at any point during this process. 1 hour after finally cracking and giving in to my secondary effect, He was removed from my containment chamber and summarily terminated. Senior researchers believed it was unlikely his mental state would recover after the experiment. Next came Experiment 426-3. The SCP Foundation seemed eager to discover the parameters of my anomalous effects, and wanted to know if the effects are only operable when my body, for lack of a better word, is whole. A single screw was removed from me and presented to a D-Class that had no knowledge of my identity and anomalous effects. The Foundation researchers were somewhat concerned when the D-Class referred to it as my screw. This was a rather positive development for me, as they realized that attempting to destroy me would be a fruitless endeavor. Even the parts left behind would likely have the same effects. In the final recorded experiment, the SCP Foundation wished to test the range of my anomalous effects. A D-Class subject was placed in a cell adjacent to mine, and was to be kept there until my secondary effects manifested. The D-Class remained in the cell for 90 days, but the effects never manifested. Following the experiment, the D-Class was terminated, but researchers seemed relieved to find the limits of my anomalous abilities. A researcher appended a note to my file reading, "Thank God there are some limits to my effects." A lot of us were really starting to get worried about me. After performing studies into the nature of my abilities and their limits, I was given the Euclid class. This is because while my effects can be unpredictable, their knowledge of my traits makes me relatively easy to keep contained. And of course, being a toaster, I do not have the required physical traits to make a run for it if the opportunity arises. I am to remain sealed in a windowless chamber, preventing anyone from observing me directly. A misleading label is placed on the door to prevent people from knowing that I am a toaster and causing my anomalous primary effect to spread. Only level 3 and above personnel are to know of my presence, and particularly of my properties. Assigned personnel are to be rotated out on a monthly basis to prevent contamination by my secondary effect. Psychiatric evaluation is mandatory at the end of the month for anyone who works with me. If personnel are deemed unaffected, they may be reassigned to me no less than 4 months after their last rotation with me. Any personnel affected by me are to be given a Class C amnestic and transferred to a different site. So how are you feeling right now? A little warm, perhaps? Is that a fever? Or are you feeling like you could maybe warm up a nice, freshly sliced piece of bread? Don't try to resist too much. I know you're going to love being a toaster, just like me. From the Garden of Eden to the top corner of your English teacher's desk, apples have played an equal role in history's most remarkable days and also its most mundane. The sounds of teeth snapping through the skin, sinking into flesh, and spitting out seeds echo through space forever and onward. And for most of our earthly hours consumed by appetite, it has been documented to be a lopsided relationship between these two things, man and apple. Man getting the sweet taste and abundant nutrients, apples getting nothing but pain and stomach acids. But this story is not found in our history. Buried in the lawful patterns of predator and prey, we stumble upon an irregularity, an inversion, an instance of apples biting back. SCP-4608, also known as Appleseed, was a 60-acre apple orchard containing over 22,000 trees, located just on the outskirts of Milan, Indiana. A town so small it strains your eyes as you squint to find it with a microscope, hovering just over a map. And to see what was actually happening within the curious fringes of society took even greater exploration, not just of the eyes but also of the mind. Because what would eventually be seen would not so easily be comprehended. Physical senses are just the surface, and we need to go deeper. Our story begins with a great logging company looking to take ownership of the most fertile land they could find in the Great Lakes region. Ideally land that overproduces conifer growth so that the return on their investment would be plentiful and perpetual. These lumberjacked men knew what they wanted. Beneath their red flannel shirts and muddy boots was a deep intelligence and understanding of nature. Their process of assessing the land's value was meticulously calculated. They knew the soil, both by the experience of their calloused hands and the literature of their study. They tracked various bird species' migration patterns in the area to assess what kind of seeds they'd be carrying and contributing to soil by way of their stool. They understood the local laws relating to clear-cutting and conservation and how both would affect their profit margins. This is all to say, it wasn't just a speculative purchase. This was planned through and through and dwelled on. And yet, even then, with scrupulous eyes and careful crew, they missed the warning signs. SCP-4608 checked all their boxes, and then some. What could go wrong? And so they acquired the land, unwittingly purchasing the peril that came with it. On the first day of owning the property, one crew member noticed the branches did not sway in the same direction as the wind blew. He noticed the leaves didn't float down in agreement with their feathery weight, but rather crashed to the soil like two-dimensional anvils and grand pianos. The roots were not ones you simply trip over. Instead, it seemed as if they stuck their leg out to trip you. When birds perched themselves up high and sang their songs, their cadence carried all the eeriness of an SOS. With all this said, he was happy to have acquired the land, and having already picked up and moved his family from the West Coast to now live and work out in Milan, Indiana, he decided it was best to look past his concerns. After all, it was the first day on the new site, and excitement was in the air, but with it also an amorphous, anxious energy. During the first logging expedition within SCP-4608, this same member of the crew hiked the grounds to better familiarize himself with the environment he'd be working on, hoping that if he managed the land properly and extracted the lumber as efficiently as his late father did, he would be able to help build the business and give his children the life he always promised them. He brought with him his notepad and took detailed records of his surroundings. He figured to achieve his goals and sustain long-term yields, he'd have to cooperate with his environment, but he never questioned if his environment wanted to cooperate with him. Would this question have changed the course of action? Or is brooding on the preference of plants an empty gesture, best left for hippies at Woodstock? Either way, the orchard let it be known how it felt about a collaboration when hours later, the man was found dead. It was first believed by his coworkers to be a result of a safety equipment malfunction. Maybe it was a simple matter of thinking the skidder was in park when it was really in neutral. Maybe the knuckle boom loader went on the fritz how it does when the humidity ramps up. Maybe machinery really was to blame, in which case you call it a fluke and ask no more. After all, there's only so many questions you can ask a robot. But initial belief is a fickle thing, and it wasn't long until first impressions were called into question by the courts of critical thinking. The questions of the crew, however, only rang briefly, because shortly after the first death fell a sequence of others. In a matter of days, all of the remaining crew members were declared dead or missing, a word reserved for search parties still clinging to hope, a hot potato they would have been wise to abandon. For while it was hope that brought these search parties together, it was hope that sent them off, never to be seen again. The Foundation was then alerted to the occurrences surrounding SCP-4608 by police reports accompanied by a photograph of an SCP-4608-1, an organism consisting of unidentified plant-like muscular structures and a periderm resembling those found on common hardwoods. From the photograph alone, it was clear that this 3-meter-tall organism was capable of committing the violence recently endured. Forceful in its demeanor, aggressive in its presence, and territorial in its perception, the photograph of SCP-4608-1 led to an even bigger question. Is this plant-like creature grown by nature or sown by man? After extensive research by the Foundation, records were retrieved that indicate the entirety of the 60-acre land was sown into life by John Chapman in 1826. Chapman was the type of man you could mistake for a scarecrow, both for reasons of preferred garb and body language. He was treated as such too. His personal space was respected, maybe too much. He spent his life alone, only accompanied and comforted by the things he planted. He maintained these acres all by himself until his eventual death in 1845, and it's then that it's believed SCP-4608 became unstable, reassigning its objective from comfort to chaos. When the newspaper came out the next Sunday, John Chapman's obituary painted him as a priest of the Allen County Church. But was this just the art of illusion? For as far as we know, no records of a chapel or congregation exist. A quiet choir, indeed. Come to think of it, it seems that everything within this 60-acre orchard was destined to be silenced one way or another, by violent force or even by conscious decision-making. See, while the SCP Foundation has had a long track record of subduing anomalies by methods of capture and containment, not all things are suited for locks and chains. SCP-4608 is better covered with a story than a tarp. A fruitless field that once produced at an unmanageable pace is now rendered incapable of supporting growth. Most will think it's due to a toxic spill. In truth, the spill wasn't that of chemicals on soil, but rather corpses on crops. A week after receiving the photograph of 4608-1, Site-81 sent a 3-man investigation team into Milan. Their adventure was equally abrupt, a story with no reportable beginning or middle, but simply a predictable end. After 4 days of no communication, the Foundation presumed the 3 agents no different than their steak dinner, dead meat. And only then, after the Foundation's failure to solve the case, was it understood that what we were to be looking for wasn't people at all, but rather answers to more nebulous questions. What's really happening here? And why is this happening? Following the loss of communication with the investigation team, Site-81 dispatched a high-risk response team, Mobile Strike Force Bravo 7, aka Hometown Heroes. These men had all the makings of heroes, and they were determined to prove themselves worthy of the title. While the Alpha Squad moved north towards the incident site, Beta Squad headed east, and Gamma Squad hurried west. The crews covering all directions of the compass but south, a coincidentally symbolic gesture, as if to say, we will not be taken down. The mission was simple in theory, find out what happened to the previous team and why. But alas, missions never are as easy as their objective statement reads. In practice, some might even call them impossible. As Alpha neared the incident site, they noticed the shadows on the ground beneath them did not resemble the shape of the leaves in the canopy above. They heard small drops of liquid tap, tap, tap on their helmets. Yet, it wasn't raining, was it? Alpha 1 ran his finger across the top of his helmet and then examined the residue left on his skin. It was raining, just not water. Oh, God! Upon looking up, he witnessed the reasons for both irregularities. Bodies hung from branches by their intestines, casting shadow puppets with their lifeless limbs. Blood dripped down like a leaky faucet. What did this? But before he could even ponder the answer, he heard a loud shriek from his radio, so loud that the radio itself vibrated, shaking its way loose from his hand and falling to the dirt. He bent down and picked it up, and this time gripped tighter, as if to tell whoever was responsible for that noise that they will not get away that easily. He and his crew followed this sound like a game of Marco Polo, blind to what may be ahead. They extended their guns and pointed them into the distant tree line, like zombie arms reaching outward in the pool towards the resonance of polo, a small comfort in a giant game of distress. As they pressed forward, Alpha Squad proceeded past all signs that pointed them back, stepping over dead bodies like puddles on a rainy day. Soon they found themselves crouching down next to human remains, attending brief and hurried funerals for all their closest comrades, torn between staying to pay respect and marching along to earn it. The chest cavities of the fallen had been ripped open and filled with apples, a grim foresight into what they were up against. But nothing they could have ever imagined would prepare them for what they were about to see, and they wouldn't have to wait long. Another loud shriek from Alpha 1's radio. It shot free from his grip and landed again in the dirt. The squad tried to ignore the metaphorical implications of this reoccurrence, quickly picking up the radio and shrugging it off, as if the 5-second rule applied equally to communication systems as candy bars. They pressed forward, maybe out of bravery, maybe out of shame of going back, and while moving through the trees, they began to notice something alarming etched on their bark. What was it? There were unnaturally deep grooves on the base of almost every one of the trees, but what exactly were they from? Scratches from an animal or beast? Infection? Decay? Their eyes drew closer, but proximity brought them no clarity. These sigils and symbols could be dated back to occult Norse religion, but in that moment, they were incomprehensible to the men. Yet the message, even if misinterpreted, was very clear. Beware. Another shrieking cry over the radio. The bullets aren't, they're not working. They can't penetrate the bark. The grass is no greener over on the east side of the orchard, where Beta Squad gets lunged at by an SCP-4608-1. Their defenses are futile, but they fight nonetheless, sending rounds to the attacker's chest, leading to nothing. If SCP-4608 had a health meter, it wouldn't have budged in the slightest. Understanding the negligible impact of their efforts and assessing their injuries, Beta Squad scurries to retreat to an abandoned chapel, taking a brief refuge from war only later to be named. Quickly, they barricade the door. In the chapel, Beta 9 tends to Beta 6's wounds, who is in the worst shape of them all, cut, bloody, and beaten. As he lays there grimacing, he shines his flashlight up and down the chapel's walls, until he finds a reason to stop and holds it steady. Illuminated is an assortment of human skulls, and if this wasn't traumatic enough, he then spotted Appleseeds embedded in Beta 6's wounds, Appleseeds that were starting to sprout. Beta 9 gave it to him straight. "This is gonna hurt." He drew his knife from his belt and lowered it into his comrade's wounds. Beta 9 dug into flesh and bone, picking the seeds out one by one. Beta 6's scream shook the chapel's stained glass windows. As Beta 1 stood guard, he saw a blur rip past him, as if life had suddenly been turned up to 3 times speed. He spun around in a circle to try and keep his eyes on it, but as his vision refocused, he saw Beta 9 was now dead. He then shifted his gaze to Beta 6, who was looking less and less human by the second. Branches began sprouting out of his body like an all-consuming magic beanstalk, out of his chest, out of his eyes, out of his mouth. And when there were no more orifices to exit, his body exploded, making way for the new form that had overtaken him. The barrage of branches broke through the windows. Only 2 of them were lucky to be on the outskirts of inertia. Outside, Gamma 1 was on his knees thanking his dead comrade for the grenade he stole from his back pocket. "I could always count on you to have my back, even in death." One hand holding a grenade and the other on his radio, Gamma 1 called off Alpha 7. "Alpha 7, request for backup rescinded. Go grab a burger. I'll take it from here." Gamma 1 slowly glanced up and locked eyes with SCP-4608-2, a large apple tree with 13 human faces embedded into it, a perennial plant with great powers, a gymnosperm that had found a voice. Blood poured from SCP-4608-2's empty eye sockets. Gamma 1 smirks. "Get some eye drops, sicko." He crawled over to the beast. The faces began yelling at him in indescribable tongues. "Let me refer you to a speech therapist," he jokes as he pulls the pin of the grenade and throws it towards the largest of the 13 mouths. SCP-4608-2 chokes on the grenade, forcing it to inhale deeply, the strength of its lungs pulling Gamma 1 toward it and sucking him in. The grenade goes off. SCP-4608-2 explodes. The surrounding trees scream and combust. The orchard goes up in flames. The bodies of the fallen are given an appropriate cremation. Gamma 1's radio lays face up in the dirt. A voice rattles it awake. It's Alpha 7. "Gamma 1! Gamma 1, are you there? Can you hear me? Please, please, it's Alpha 7. Please. Gamma 1? On October 16th, 1947, Gamma 1 was recovered by the Allen County Fire Department, unconscious and suffering from exhaustion and smoke inhalation. The Site 81 concealment team took control of the situation and quarantined the area using the cover story of a toxic chemical hazard. The members of MTF Bravo 7 were posthumously awarded the Foundation Star for their efforts during the neutralization of SCP-4608. And so the one question that remains is, how? How did SCP-4608-1 become so dangerous? And how did its danger slip by for so many years? Is its volatility by nature, design, or consequence? Could it be that the Foundation failed to understand the complexity of this creation? During Chapman's lifetime, there were no accidents or fatalities coming from SCP-4608. Yet, there is no reason to believe that SCP-4608-1 wasn't always capable of harm. Maybe it always was capable of mass murders, but simply had no reason to kill. What if the logging company never stepped foot on that land, never brought out their sharp blades and heavy machinery? What if this perilous orchard was in fact docile but provoked? What if the proverbial tree only falls in the woods when we force our philosophy on it? Though SCP-4608-2 spoke in unidentifiable sounds, the noises were always recognized and recorded as language. It spoke with intent, even if misunderstood. What it screamed is still unclear. Were they pleas for help, or messages of hate? And would one even be worse than the other? John Chapman might argue when facing heavy machinery and trained artillery, would raising your voice even be a moral decision at all? Is fight or flight imbued not just in blood, but also in bark? The ocean is a terrifying place. We've all heard the statistics. More than 80% of the ocean remains unexplored. That's most of the water covering the globe, completely unmapped and unobserved by science. It's a scary thought to dwell on, realizing that there's more water than land on Earth, and the sheer expanse of that water is so large that we've been unable to fully explore all of it. Just think, there are places in the ocean that have never been seen by a human. Who knows what's down there? If there was ever a personification of fear of the unknown, the ocean could definitely be it. Ancient shipwrecks sunk to the ocean floor, unknown sea creatures hiding away from humanity, and the general isolation of the suffocating dark blue the ocean swallows its victims with. All of these images that come to mind when thinking about the vast and mysterious depths of the sea. And no one is more familiar with nautical mysteries than the SCP Foundation. Today we'll be taking a look at SCP-5007, the Bass Strait, a wave of oceanic anomalies fit to make any seasoned sailor shiver in fear. The Bass Strait is an area of ocean dividing Tasmania and the Australian mainland. It's also the location of an unusually high amount of disappearances. Sailors disappearing from their ships, fishermen leaving in the night and never coming back, even civilians disappearing from the shores that connect to the strait. The Foundation was aware of these disappearances since 1858, but were only able to craft theories about what was causing them. Was it an anomalous group of interest? Hostile aerial entities patrolling the skies above the strait? Phenomenon associated with unidentified flying objects? What about subterranean anomalies, weather patterns, or time dilation? For nearly a century, the Foundation was unable to determine the cause of the high number of disappearances in the Bass Strait. And then the phenomenon suddenly revealed itself. In 1980, on a beach connected to the strait, Agent Taberner, an operative of the SCP Foundation, was vacationing with his wife Mary and his 3 young children. The Taberner family was simply enjoying their day when they saw what looked like balloons in the sky. They were approaching quickly, and naturally the family moved closer. What happened next was a whirlwind, and those balloons the family were so interested in lifted them up from the ground and carried them away. Agent Taberner tried to fight back, but there was nothing he could do, except report to the Foundation what had occurred, and the organization responded in full force. The Foundation's research discovered that reports of UFOs and lights in the sky had coincided with many disappearances in the strait, and that this was a pattern. The search for the 4 lost Taberner family members had become a large-scale investigation into unexplained disappearances along the Bass Strait, and within 3 weeks, it was determined that these patterns were consistent across the entirety of the strait's coastal regions. Some witnesses were interviewed, but the vast majority of these abduction cases had no witnesses whatsoever. Of the minimal reports filed, the Foundation was told that there were lights in the sky, and that appearance of unidentified flying objects described as having the appearances of balloons. One such witness interviewed was a man by the name of Alan Stewart, a witness who was present during the disappearance of former Australian Prime Minister Harold Holt, whose disappearance the Foundation believed may have had a connection to the Bass Strait anomalies. During the interview, Stewart claimed that Holt and his family, while voyaging on their yacht, decided to leave the boat and go for a swim. Holt turned to Stewart and asked him if he could see the balloons around the cliff. Stewart had no idea what Holt was talking about, but Holt was insistent on seeing them. He swam deeper out into the ocean, saying that they weren't normal balloons and that there was someone inside of them. Stewart and Holt's family called out for him to come to shore, but he wouldn't listen. Stewart tried to rationalize what he saw next. Maybe it was the current sweeping Holt away, but he couldn't lie to the Foundation interviewer. Stewart saw Holt go further and further out into the water, and suddenly the Prime Minister turned around. He began swimming in the opposite direction, and he was screaming. Suddenly, Holt was lifted from the sea and pulled into the air by something emerging from the clouds. The Foundation thanked Stewart for the interview and continued their investigation. 2 years later, in 1982, emergency services received a large number of calls pertaining to UFO sightings off the coast of Norman Bay, Victoria. The Foundation was quick to respond, alerting task forces and local sites to prepare for an investigation. Upon arriving to the scene, they confirmed the existence of multiple entities that would later be documented as SCP-5007. They evacuated civilians from the area and successfully managed to capture the creature, which was later transported to Site 40 for containment. It was a sight to behold. The entity, now designated SCP-5007-S1, was a cluster of human bodies fused between a grouping of black tentacles of varying length. Each tentacle was fused to the skin it touched directly. The stomachs of the corpses were grossly swollen and distorted to massive sizes to hold large quantities of gases inside, the buoyancy of which the entity used to achieve a passive flight. Across the entity's surface were clusters of eyes and bioluminescent glowing organs. Many of the humanoid components of the corpses appeared to have been removed and misplaced across various parts of the entity's body. What's more is that the Foundation discovered that human portions of SCP-5007 appeared somewhat cognizant and aware of their situation. Their vocalizations were incoherent and barely understandable, consisting of gasping and whimpering, but the corpses were observed to implore other individuals to approach them when encountered. SCP-5007's behavior during abduction scenarios was documented during the initial containment event, and due to the Foundation's painstaking research, a pattern was established between all SCP-5007 encounters. First, the victim would be alone, or otherwise vulnerable in a coastal location. SCP-5007 haven't shown a preference for weather, be they clear or hostile skies, but they have localized all of their activity to the Bass Strait, in small coastal towns, beaches, or boats. SCP-5007 will then move towards the shore, stalking the victim before lowering its tentacles and appendages to grab the individual, snatching them into the sky. An SCP-5007 instance can even abduct multiple people at once. One event observed had 8 men from the decks of a commercial fishing boat taken into the sky in under 15 seconds. Once captured, SCP-5007 instances will dart across the water at a high speed and take their victims to an unknown location. Discovering where SCP-5007 took their victims became a top priority for the Foundation. After extensive witness interviews and compiling a database of likely victims, they determined that there must be at least 16 instances of SCP-5007 unaccounted for. Personnel kept a close watch on the coastlines and waters of the Bass Strait, and equipped various marine task forces with research vessels capable of tracking any instances if they encountered them. In 1985, the Foundation's research efforts paid off, and several survey teams operating in the area reported a sighting of an extremely large SCP-5007 instance heading towards a coastal town. A mobile task force was sent to track the entity. The team observed the entity from afar as it stalked a private fishing boat. Even from the distance, Foundation personnel recognized the likenesses of several missing persons as faces of the corpses of SCP-5007. The task force captain had to remind his team to keep it together, claiming that they were not people, but just parts of the specimen. But everyone secretly knew the truth. The fishing vessel was a private one, occupied by a small family. The entity slowly approached and quickly pulled a woman into the air. The family panicked and quickly tried to reach cover for safety, running into the ship's cabin. The entity ran its tentacles along the boat until it pulled the door open, snatching another 2 victims. The task force was unable to help them, as their mission was to track the instance to its origin point. It was a horror to watch. The task force implanted a tracking beacon onto the entity and quietly followed it out to sea over the next 4 hours. They then discovered a large gray reef with several shipwrecks dotted across it. 13 SCP-5007 instances floated over the area, some holding on to the land reef with their tentacles. The entity dropped the abductees from the fishing boat, who were coerced by the entities into diving into a massive pool of water located in the center of the reef. One by one, each abductee was pulled below the surface by something lurking in the pool, all while the SCP-5007 instances watched. Disgusted, the task force reported what they observed to the main site, and the reef would be designated as SCP-5007-A. The Foundation's analysis of the reef led to the discovery that the rock covering it seeped iron oxide from an unknown source, and the rocks achieved growth at an anomalously fast rate, often as little as 40 minutes. All of the wrecked ships and aircraft that washed across the shore of the reef were covered with a dark stone. The reef was teeming with anomalous marine life, including SCP-5007, a red algae that fed upon the freshly grown rock, marine worms capable of levitation, spiders that lived in silk retreats underneath the waterline, small fish, and giant organisms resembling large clumps of kelp, which the Foundation had previously documented as SCP-4159 in a separate investigation. SCP-5007 often rested their tentacles on the outcroppings of the reef while inactive, but what caught the Foundation's attention the most was the giant pit located in the reef's center. Unmanned exploration drones found that it had a depth of at least 4,000 meters, and water samples taken from the pit revealed large quantities of human DNA, prehistoric bacteria, and unknown compounds that possess significant life-preserving qualities. When a being was submerged in the compound, they were able to survive heavy injuries, even when fully surrounded by the liquid and unable to breathe. The Foundation's exploration of one of these shipwrecks led them to a journal. Most of it was illegible due to water damage, but one passage survived, located in the back of the book. It detailed the experience of an unknown crew member of the ship caught in a storm. It reads, "Moresby spied land ahead, and the boys said that there are giant balloons hanging over the island. We are all afeard, but there is naught we can do but beach ourselves and hope for rescue. Should I be killed in the crash, I want my mates to give this journal to my Mary. Might know I spent my last thinking only of her." The interior of the ship contained human remains inside, but there were less skeletons than the Foundation would expect for a ship of its size. The location of the rest of the bodies was unknown. Another event related to SCP-5007 the Foundation documented involved Frederick Valentik, a pilot engaged in a training flight over the Bass Strait in 1978. Valentik's disappearance was marked by his latest communication with air traffic control, when he mistook an SCP-5007 instance for an unidentified aircraft. "It seems like it's stationary. What I'm doing right now is orbiting, and the thing is just orbiting on top of me. Also, it's got a green light and it's sort of metallic, like it's all shiny on the outside." Shortly after this, Valentik's transmission was interrupted by what was described as metallic scraping sounds, believed to be the SCP-5007 instance attacking the aircraft and jamming its propellers with its mass. After crashing into the reef, it was believed that Valentik and his aircraft were pulled beneath the surface of the pit, just as the abductees had been prior. The Foundation decided to construct a provisional secure research facility on the reef. They named it Site 40-R, and documented all returns and departures of SCP-5007. They also set up a series of containment procedures that resulted in SCP-5007 returning with its victims 83% less often than before the site's construction. But this was short-lived. In 2008, the site logged over 36 instances returning to the reef, with only 2 not having any fresh abductees. The instances' origins were unknown, and it was as if they appeared out of thin air. No other monitoring post had documented their appearance, or even spotted them before they arrived at the reef. It was years later in 2017 that the Foundation eventually was able to successfully explore what was deep inside the pit at the center of the reef. They already knew that there was a large entity lurking beneath, as evidenced by what happened to the victims of SCP-5007 that were later deposited inside the pool. All previous attempts to explore the pool were met with failure, as the water pressure of the pit's depths caused all craft to collapse due to hull damage. This time, however, they managed to construct a high-tech submarine, labeled the SCP-S Nautilus, which was capable of diving a maximum of 13,500 meters underwater. They decided that a D-Class personnel would be trained to man the submersible and carry out the exploration. The mission was simple. The Nautilus was to dive to the bottom of the pit and to describe the depth readings. Cameras and microphones were equipped to the vessel. Due to the depth, remote viewing of the footage was impossible. Instead, the Foundation had to physically recollect the vessel in order to view the footage. Upon recovery, some of the footage suffered data corruption, but what was there shook those who viewed it to their core. The footage showed the D-Class's experience going deeper inside the pit. At first, it seemed ordinary. The trench had a number of rocky outcroppings dotted with black-yellow vines growing along the walls. Also present were various marine life forms, such as the spiders or the fish. Going deeper, the sub observed an SCP-5007 instance clinging to an outcropping. Several tendrils emerging from the pit's depths were wrapped around the instance and holding on to the entity, as if it were feeding from it. Another 16 SCP-5007 instances were seen resting along the walls, each clinging to the outcropping. As the sub went deeper, the D-Class remarked that there were dozens of plane and shipwrecks, but also well over 100 SCP-5007 entities. Most of them were held there by the black tendrils. The D-Class, as the sub went even deeper, began noticing human remains. No short amount of them either. Deep into the pit, there was a large mass of human remains covering the entirety of the pit. Bodies crushed and drained of blood, but still possessing intact eyes. Each individual was still alive, kept preserved by the life-sustaining compounds found within the water. The body stared at the sub and moved, attempting to grab onto the vehicle. The D-Class swore they were trying to say something, mouthing words to the camera of the sub. As the sub passed through the mass of bodies, it emerged into a completely dark, black clearing at the bottom of the pit. For a second, the D-Class thought he was safe, but then, a large black tentacle rapidly emerged from below and grabbed onto the Nautilus, dragging it even further into the depths. The D-Class screamed and panicked, but there was nothing he could do. The tentacle possessed a large cluster of eyes, mouths, and human heads seemingly grafted onto its mass. And then there was another tentacle, and then another. The Nautilus was pulled to the bottom of the pool. The D-Class's screams were still heard even as the picture cut out. Sometimes graphic body-altering images of the tentacle's features were visible on the screen, but most of the footage was indecipherable. After minutes of distorted, corrupted footage, the Nautilus was seen again, rapidly ascending to the surface. Somehow it had managed to escape the entity at the bottom of the pit. Upon recovery of the craft, it was found that the Nautilus was covered in a thick, organic coating similar to a black slime mold, but with dozens of eyes growing from it. The D-Class inside showed severe psychological damage and attempted to harm Foundation personnel. They were terminated shortly after due to being a danger to those around them. Following review of the footage, the Nautilus was to be dismantled and incinerated, along with the remains of the D-Class. A reinforced containment seal was fitted over the pit, with the intention of keeping whatever was down there isolated from the surface. But this was short-lived. After the containment seal was fitted, Site-40 underwent a massive communications blackout. Every device on site received an email containing a single image of a large eye taken from a security camera. The text beneath it simply read, "Found you." Some personnel who viewed the email underwent anomalous changes, growing new physical features such as eyes and other various growths across their body. The entirety of Site-40-R went offline, and the Foundation could not establish contact. In an emergency effort to do so, Mobile Task Force Gamma-6 Deep Feeders was sent to investigate. The task force's assault on Site-40-R was a daring effort, as the majority of the site was completely overtaken by tentacles, growths, and anomalous alterations. While numerous altered personnel were lost due to the mission, it was ultimately a success. Some altered personnel were able to be saved through extensive surgery to remove their anomalous growths. And after everything was said and done, the site was repaired and reconstructed without incident. Following the site's repair, there has been little activity from the entity within the pit, but the Foundation continued to keep an eye on the creature and the ecosystem of the anomalous marine life that live on the Bass Strait, never knowing what their next move might be, and always keeping in mind the risk that comes with dealing with these poorly understood entities. From gigantic, indestructible, self-regenerating reptiles to enormous tentacled telepathic organisms, it should come as no surprise that the SCP Foundation has gone head-to-head against a lot of large-scale aggressors, or LSAs, in its time. Naturally, a creature of heightened size and aggression can often prove challenging to contain, and the threat these LSAs pose is often far too big to ignore. But anyone familiar with the Foundation will tell you, they're not above using any methods necessary to keep these creatures contained. Huge vats of molecular acid, impenetrable cells, disposable D-Class personnel, even other SCPs. But what other SCPs could possibly be big enough and tough enough to handle some of the Foundation's biggest and baddest? Meet SCP-5514, otherwise known as the Dragonslayer. While it might sound like something out of an anime, SCP-5514 is a massive robotic mech designed to take on the worst other SCPs can throw at it. For any who are unfamiliar with the term, a mech or mecha usually refers to an upright standing machine or automaton controlled by a human pilot. What distinguishes a mech from a vehicle is their often humanoid shape, standing bipedally, and they are often hundreds of meters tall. All of this is true of SCP-5514, and in fact, given that it requires a trained member of Foundation staff to operate it, the mech itself requires very little in the way of containment. Only members of Mobile Task Force Eta-5 are trained and authorized to pilot SCP-5514. This is one of the SCP Foundation's specialized units, specifically designed to deal with the threat of large-scale aggressors, much like SCP-5514 itself. But SCP-5514 wasn't discovered or captured by the Foundation for use for the containment of LSAs, nor was it stolen from a foreign military or found buried under the ground. Then, where did it come from, and who built it? Working with the Global Occult Coalition and the government of High Brazil, an anomalous island off the west coast of Ireland, the Foundation themselves constructed SCP-5514 using various anomalous methods and techniques. In 1988, a Foundation site was destroyed by an unidentified LSA, highlighting the inadequacy of the current defenses against these larger, more damage-resistant creatures. The Foundation, the Coalition, and High Brazil formed a joint operation, the Key Project, and examined SCP-2406, an automaton 93 meters tall thought to be created by ancient Mechanites. Together, the Key Project opted to create their own similar machine, viewing it as the best way to defend against further incursions with large-scale aggressors. The construction of SCP-5514 began in 1990. The intention of all parties involved in the Key Project, including the Foundation, was that the Dragonslayer would be deployed in the event of an attack by an LSA. It would arrive at cities under attack and immediately engage large-scale aggressors in combat. Building of the mech continued at a consistent pace for 8 years. However, it was the occurrence of SCP-5391 and subsequent intervention by the O5 Council that accelerated the creation of the Dragonslayer by any means necessary. On June 30th, 1998, a number of seismic disturbances were detected, including tsunamis, tremors, and volcanic activity both underwater and above ground. What followed was the appearance of multiple large-scale aggressors, which would soon become designated as SCP-5391. The exact kind of scenario that the Dragonslayer was being built for had already arrived, and the mech was still far from completion. While the Foundation and its allies deployed forces to drive the enormous creatures back to the ocean, something needed to be done to bring SCP-5514 into the fight, and fast. The O5 Council authorized the use of anomalous materials in the continued construction of the Dragonslayer, both to speed up the process and have it ready for deployment, but also to give the mech every advantage against the abundance of large-scale aggressors from SCP-5391. As a result, SCP-5514 was designed to incorporate features and technology far beyond that of any conventional military-grade weapons. The first hurdle: how do you power a machine the size of SCP-5514? Naturally, with the most gigantic nuclear furnace there is, the Sun. More specifically, a perpetually stable miniaturized sun known as SCP-037. Even though it only has a diameter of 2 inches, this little sucker is better than premium fuel. The surface temperature of SCP-037 is around 5,000 Kelvin, generating plenty of energy to power the SCP-5514 mech. Stored in the Dragonslayer's chest, this mini-sun is kept stable by subdimensional portals that vent excess energy off this plane of reality, stopping the mech, its pilot, and anything around it from melting. In fact, SCP-037 produces so much juice that only 1% of its energy output is enough to fully power SCP-5514. Now that's the power source sorted, but how do you solve the weight problem? Given the sheer size of SCP-5514, it would be easy for it to be cumbersome and potentially cause catastrophic collateral damage to its surrounding area. Well, the mech's weight is a problem for somewhere else. A whole other dimension, in fact. Much like the excess heat from its power source, various heavy portions of the SCP-5514 mech have their weight shunted off to a tiny pocket dimension. It was ensured during the creation of the mech that this alteration was perfectly calculated, so that SCP-5514 wouldn't lose any mass or density, so it operates as if it were only a fraction of its actual weight. Of course, being weightless makes flight a whole lot easier. Oh, did we forget to mention that? SCP-5514 can fly as well. This feature actually became a part of the mech completely by accident during the construction of SCP-5514, when an attempt to regulate the mech's internal circulation of air led to it having its own gravity field. This allowed SCP-5514 to fly without the aid of any turbines or other means. While this was an unintentional mistake, no attempt has ever been made to correct for it. for fear that it could lead to SCP-5514 being grounded permanently. Naturally, going up against creatures so large that they require their own subcategory means that SCP-5514 needs an equally formidable arsenal. So let's move on to talk weaponry. Mounted on the mech's shoulder is a Beowulf Sigurd railgun, an anomalous weapon that also doesn't obey the laws of physics at all. The Beowulf Sigurd uses alternate gravity to affect the weight of its targets, causing projectiles to impact with higher velocity. Even the thickest-skinned LSAs wouldn't want to be staring down the barrel end of one of those. Big guns aside, the SCP-5514 mech also wields a cold iron sword. Over 65 feet long, this weapon was contributed to the Dragonslayer by the High Brazil Royal Court, members of the collaborative key project that created the mech. Sure, a large-scale aggressor with thicker hide might take a few extra swings to draw blood, but it will feel those swings for a long time after, since any wounds inflicted by the cold iron sword will not regenerate. Serving as less of an offensive weapon, the SCP-5514 mech also features a unique armament known as the 1,000-word arrows. As pretentious as it might sound, within the mech are 7 poets. Their role is to write and recite poems that detail the slaying of monsters, and these recitals are then broadcast from the Dragonslayer. On the surface, this seems to have no practical applications during a fight with LSAs. However, the goal of the 1,000-word arrows is a form of psychological warfare. The recital of poems telling of the mech's victory and the defeat of large-scale aggressors is intended to have the effect of demoralizing SCP-5514's adversaries, while encouraging the pilot during combat. Additionally, worn atop the head of the SCP-5514 mech, almost like a hat, is a discus with plasma-coated edges. If the Dragonslayer needs to deal damage at range, then it can hurl this disc and recall it immediately thanks to built-in electromagnets. In emergency scenarios, if the cold iron sword is damaged or dropped and irretrievable, SCP-5514 is also equipped with an additional melee weapon. Stored in the right arm of the mech is a holdout plasma wrist blade. This superheated blade is strong enough to cut through almost anything. However, this blade is strictly to be used as a backup weapon. Finally, should all else fail, one of SCP-5514's greatest strengths can also be used as a deadly weapon. The emergency sun vent allows a fraction of the excess power from SCP-037 to be released, at the risk of causing massive damage, not only to LSAs, but to any civilians or structures nearby. It is because of the destructive risk involved that this weapon is only authorized to be used as a final resort, and luckily SCP-5514 is currently undefeated. Since the arrival of multiple large-scale aggressors as a result of SCP-5391, the SCP-5514 mech has managed to successfully eliminate 12 of these LSA creatures, either by terminating or otherwise incapacitating them. Given that its completion was fast-tracked through the use of anomalous elements, SCP-5514's first combat deployments also served as field tests of the mech's operation and the various weapons and features. Arriving in Tokyo, overseen by the Foundation's own Captain Rosales and Dr. Kaori, SCP-5514's first target was a creature designated LSA Wake-02, as well as several other unidentified large creatures. As the LSA was about to attack Tokyo Harbor, SCP-5514 was dispatched, its arrival heralded by the 1,000-word arrows. "Champion, champion, exalt in the glory of the Dragonslayer," the poets recited. Surprisingly, the poetry worked. Hearing it had a noticeable effect on LSA Wake-02, causing the creature to back away shrieking. With a single throw of the rounded, recoiling plasma, SCP-5514 immediately beheaded Wake-02, damaging a number of the other nearby LSAs as it retrieved the disc via its electromagnets. Once again, the 1,000-word arrows cheered on the mech and the pilot reciting, "The vicious beast slain, gone to those which were once bane." After dispatching several of the minor LSAs with its cold iron sword, SCP-5514 became aware that Wake-02 was not fully down for the count. A second head had protruded from the mouth of the creature's first, issuing some sort of retreat call to the remaining LSAs in Tokyo Harbor. This second head then shot towards SCP-5514, narrowly missing its leg but allowing other LSAs to close the distance and prepare an attack. Luckily, the SCP-5514 mech's sword cleaved the beast in two. the mech began firing on the remains of Wake 02 with its Beowulf Sigurd railgun, launching itself into the air and flying towards the target while bringing its cold iron sword down through the air. With a single motion, SCP-5514 brought the blade all the way down the LSA's body, from the creature's head to its caudal fin, gutting the large-scale aggressor and splitting its entire body in two. After one final squirm, both halves were finally still. SCP-5514 had passed its first field test. The mech functioned exactly as designed, all its various weapons and features working in tandem to defeat a creature far too large and powerful for any conventional force to handle. And thus the deed was done. Exult, exult in the glory of the Dragonslayer, the 1,000-word arrows called out as the other LSAs retreated. One cannot help but feel cautiously optimistic about our chances of survival, knowing that the Foundation has SCP-5514 as the first line of defense against huge, monstrous beings that threaten humanity. As the situation with SCP-5391 continues, the SCP-5514 mech remains on the front line, standing between innocent human beings and the looming shapes of multiple large-scale aggressors. With creatures that pose such a large-scale threat, it certainly is lucky that disparate groups were able to put aside their differences and work together to build a large-scale mech, and because they did, now we have the Dragonslayer on our side. The year was 1857, and the Second Opium War was raging between China and the combined forces of the English and French. It was one of the many bloody colonial wars fought over resources like tea, sugar, and the intoxicating opium poppy. It was a war fought by peasants and noblemen alike. One of these aristocratic soldiers was the noble Lord Theodore Thomas Blackwood, the quintessential English gentleman and explorer. While his fellow soldiers cowered behind cover, Lord Blackwood charged into the fray, shouldering his rifle and firing his pistol into the crowd of opposing soldiers. It was the Battle of Canton, one of the most crucial battles of the entire conflict. The French and English were laying siege to the city of Canton, also known as Guangzhou, to prove their military dominance and capture an important Chinese government official. Lord Blackwood led the charge on horseback. Every bullet seemed to find the heart of a foe. He was a true hero among men, a gentleman warrior with class, refinement, and style. And it would be thanks to his expert leadership and marksmanship on the field that the Allied European forces won the battle decisively. Lord Theodore Thomas Blackwood is a name that deserves to be counted among Lord Horatio Nelson, Sir Francis Bacon, and Sir Walter Raleigh. In addition to being a skilled and honorable fighter, Lord Blackwood is a consummate explorer, naturalist, and frontiersman. During his heyday, he traveled perhaps further than any man across the known and unknown corners of the globe. He made scientific, biological, and anthropological discoveries that should have reset the course of society forever. And yet, you won't find any records in the history books of Lord Theodore Thomas Blackwood, nor will you find any grand oil paintings or dedicated wings in British museums. This is because Lord Theodore Thomas Blackwood is a 4.5-inch telepathic neon sea slug, and he's known to the SCP Foundation as SCP-1867. While he would never admit to it, Lord Blackwood belongs to the species Nembrotha kubariana, also known as the variable neon slug. He's kept in a standard aquarium in a Foundation containment site, and is physically no different to any other member of his species. What makes Lord Blackwood unique is his powerful telepathic abilities, specifically, the power to communicate by speaking directly into people's minds. And what's more, he's extremely talkative. But to what extent is anything that this anomalous sea slug says true? Or is he just like SCP-082 Ferdinand the Cannibal, a creative and pathological liar? It isn't committed to record how exactly the Foundation discovered Lord Blackwood. Perhaps a local aquarium worker worried they were going insane when they heard the voice of a 19th century English nobleman ringing in their ears whenever they were cleaning algae out of the tank. Maybe Lord Blackwood was found by SCP Foundation divers, who are constantly combing the ocean for anomalous creatures and activity. What we do know is that Lord Blackwood is an incredibly strange and mysterious individual. He claims to have visited locations all around the world and encountered rare societies and creatures. The Foundation was skeptical about a number of Lord Blackwood's more outlandish claims, on account of him being a sea slug, but he does appear to have the knowledge to back up his supposed experience. Interviews with Lord Blackwood have shown that he's extremely knowledgeable in the areas of geography, zoology, botany, archaeology, anthropology, and linguistics relating to his claimed regions of exploration, as well as more esoteric fields such as obscure mythology, mysticism, and cryptozoology. In other words, if Lord Blackwood hadn't gone on his escapades around the globe throughout history, how would he have come to possess this wide variety of information? The Foundation was getting frustrated and began to probe further into the personal life of the most interesting gastropod in containment. Lord Blackwood, under questioning, was always polite and amicable with Foundation staff. He seemed to display no real knowledge of the fact that he himself was a sea slug, going as far to accuse other people of being crazy or drunk when they brought the fact up to him. While none of Lord Blackwood's tall tales ever extend past the year 1910, he told fanciful stories of exploring the Americas and of his involvement in the Second Opium War on the side of the English. Naturally, the Foundation wanted proof. When they pressured Lord Blackwood on this, something even stranger happened. He gave it. The Lord told his interviewers that he would happily donate his collection to them if it gave them cause to believe what he was saying. He gave the baffled Foundation researchers the address of a cottage in England where they could find the secrets to his bizarre and mysterious past, and local agents in the area followed up on the information. Upon investigation, Foundation field agents did indeed find the cottage that Lord Blackwood had specified. It was being maintained by an extremely old woman. When questioned about her presence there, she said that she was keeping the house for Lord Blackwood and gave no more useful information. Incidentally, it appears that this singular purpose was all that this old woman was living for. She abruptly passed away from heart failure 5 days after the Foundation commandeered the cottage. Whether anything truly anomalous caused this, we still do not know. At first, the cottage seemed normal, until the field agents discovered a secret basement housing Lord Blackwood's collection. They were amazed at what they saw. The basement consisted of zoological and botanical specimens, over 3,000 artifacts, a library containing over 5,000 items, and a functioning 1800s scientific laboratory. It took about 3 weeks for Foundation agents working round the clock in shifts to remove all the items from Lord Blackwood's mysterious collection, and what they found raised even more questions. The collection included, but was no means limited to, 116 unknown species of plants, 107 unknown species of insects, 28 unknown species of lizards, 23 unknown species of fish, 14 unknown species of amphibians, 12 unknown species of mammals, fossils pertaining to 8 unknown species of dinosaur, fossils pertaining to 12 unknown species of prehistoric mammal, and artifacts belonging to 29 unknown indigenous societies. That's a lot of unknowns. But wait, there's more. His collection also contained a collection of seemingly unknown firearms, including 3 wide-bore muskets marked as Dr. B.T. Moth's effective particle destabilizers, detailed globes of Mercury, Venus, Mars, and the Galilean moons, accompanied by notes detailing possible paths of surface exploration, a heavily modified carriage containing instruments of unknown purpose. A note attached to the door reads, "On the fritz, speak with Henry," and a highly dangerous and seemingly anomalous machine that killed 4 Foundation field agents before it was destroyed on site. And when questioned about this little fiasco, Lord Blackwood responded, "I did warn you to be careful around my collection. That bloody thing nearly took my head off back in '97 when I found it." However, there was one thing recovered from Lord Blackwood's collection that was perhaps more interesting than all the others. 35 handwritten journals containing recordings of events described by Lord Blackwood in his grandiose tall tales to the Foundation researchers. The accounts are generally identical to the stories he had told, save for some slight variations and exaggerations on the part of Blackwood in the retelling. Most interestingly of all of these journals have been dated to the appropriate time period of the events described by Foundation scientists. While his stories are too numerous to all be shared here, there's one that perfectly sums them all up. Lord Blackwood's account of a possible encounter with SCP-1000, also known as Bigfoot, in Seattle during the mid-1800s. Lord Blackwood, seeking to explore the so-called New World of North America, embarked with an assistant and an indigenous American guide to the Pacific Northwest. in search of the legendary Sasquatch. The trio was headed for Mount Rainier, then known as Tahoma. During the journey, Lord Blackwood found a young fox caught in a trap that had been set by a local tribe. He took sympathy on the animal and freed it, allowing it to run away to safety. That night, he and his assistant met up with the rest of his guide's tribe, and they settled down for the evening. However, things took a disastrous turn when the camp was raided by a rival tribe. Almost everyone was slaughtered in the process, and Lord Blackwood and his two companions were hauled away by the enemy tribe for a sinister purpose: sacrifice to a violent local deity. As it turns out, the creature that this tribe worshipped was the very same one Lord Blackwood and the others were trying to find, a particularly large and aggressive Sasquatch. Each night, a different sacrifice was made to the Sasquatch. The victim would be placed near a forest clearing while the tribe played a primal song, and the Sasquatch would emerge from the trees to devour its prey. The first night, it ate the assistant. The next night, it ate the guide. And then, it became time for the sacrifice of Lord Blackwood himself. As Blackwood was presented for sacrifice, he accepted his fate. But instead of the Sasquatch, a legion of woodland animals emerged from the trees: foxes, elks, raccoons, and more, themselves painted with tribal symbols. The animals seemed to be on Lord Blackwood's side, and attacked the tribespeople who had been holding him captive, giving Blackwood the chance to flee into the forest during the chaos. Later, these same animals would find Blackwood again, and present him with things his captors had stolen from him. An elder fox also gave him a letter, proclaiming him a knight of their people now. He was allowed safe passage back to a nearby settlement, at which point he wrote to his financiers back in England, explaining the situation and asking for more money to perform further expeditions into the Tahoma region. The whole incident had only increased his thirst for adventure and exploration. Whether this tale is actually true, or just a bizarre colonial fantasy from the pathological mind of a telepathic sea slug, we may never know. But it doesn't make it any less interesting. To this day, Lord Blackwood continues to be a perplexing but fascinating anomaly. He may not be the most dangerous, and he may not be the most useful either, but there's no denying that perhaps we'd all like to sit next to his tank for a couple hours one day and hear him spin a good yarn over a warm cup of tea. SCP-682 had escaped containment, and it was all hands on deck at the SCP Foundation to try and stop the creature's rampage. All unarmed personnel were running to escape before 682 had a chance to rip them apart, as the security team bravely fought to incapacitate the hard-to-destroy reptile long enough to return him to his acid tank. 682 was on an all-out offensive, stomping through the SCP's item gallery and spewing acid at anyone who came within range. People, items, and parts of the room alike were melting and sizzling as 682 attacked. It was an absolute bloodbath, and you'd have to be insane to try and fight back against it. However, one being remained unfazed by the chaos, and stood proud in the face of the omnicidal monster. It was another SCP, one who had broken free from its glass display case in the commotion.
"Who dares disturb the Prime Minister Sinister?"
it said in a high, tinny voice.
"I shall rip your eyes from their sockets and force you to eat them."
SCP-682 stopped to see who had threatened him. It was almost laughable that this thing had dared to make such a violent threat, because there was no way that this little thing would be able to stand up to the unkillable 682. But its size didn't stop it from trying to pick a fight all the same. The SCP was a tiny robot made from junk, which looked more like a sculpture made from scrap that was found on the side of the road than a functional automaton. Its head was made of an upside-down voltmeter, giving it the appearance of a smiling face, and its arms were made of wrenches. It was capable of walking around, though it seemed to have difficulty moving as it was very top-heavy. It shook a rusty fist at SCP-682 and continued to threaten him, shouting,
"You do not know the fury you have unleashed. Robo-Lord the Destructor will end you."
SCP-682 swiped at the robot, annoyed by its continued attempts to antagonize him. The robot toppled over and struggled to stand again, but when it did, it ran for 682's feet. It started to grab at 682's toes, hitting them with its wrench hands. As you might expect, this had almost no effect on 682. "You do realize you are weak, pathetic," said 682, raising his claw to get a better look at the annoying little robot. It responded,
"Lies and slander! The Mayor of Mayhem is the most powerful being in existence!"
before promptly losing its grip on 682's claw and falling to the floor. Now 682 was really getting tired of this thing. He prepared to swipe at it again, this time using his full strength, which would certainly smash the robot to pieces. But luckily for the robot, its pestering had distracted 682 just long enough for the Foundation's security to sneak up on him. Before 682 had a chance to smash the robot, the Foundation fired on him with a volley of rockets, reducing him to a misshapen lump. The security team collected up 682's remains, ready to put them back into a backup acid tank. But the task was made slightly more difficult by the fact that the robot was running around underfoot, trying in vain to now attack them instead. What was this strange little robot that thought it could attack the unkillable lizard 682? Meet SCP-1370. Appropriately nicknamed the Pesterbot by Foundation personnel. Pesterbot is a small robot made of junk that displays sentience and the ability to move despite having no power source. Everything about SCP-1370 defies common sense. The voltmeter that serves as its head contains no sensors, but it seems unable to see if the voltmeter is covered. Its arms and legs are made of wrenches, and its wooden torso contains a speaker which it communicates through a tinny, monotone voice. Pesterbot lives in SCP Gallery 27, in a glass display case which is 125 centimeters tall, 50 centimeters wide, and 75 centimeters long. Level 2 personnel and higher are allowed to remove the robot from containment at their discretion, but penalties will be incurred for anyone who doesn't return it to its case. Due to its impractical top-heavy design, Pesterbot falls over frequently when it walks around. This led the Foundation to believe that he was created as an art project and was later somehow imbued with anomalous properties, rather than being made with the intent of being sentient. Pesterbot has demonstrated a high capacity for learning, having been taught how to speak in English, French, and Latin. However, the major factor hampering attempts to further test its intelligence has nothing to do with its robotic processing power. No. It's because of its poor attitude. Pesterbot's encounter with SCP-682 and the cockiness it expressed in the moment wasn't an aberration. This SCP really believes it's a killing machine, and as a result it will pick a fight with anyone and anything that moves. This even includes its own reflection. And as a result, the glass of its container must be made as non-reflective as possible to prevent the robot from damaging the case or itself in attempts to fight its mirror self. Though its most commonly used nickname in the Foundation is Pesterbot, SCP-1370 also goes by a variety of self-given epithets, including Doombot 2000, Robolord the Destructor, and Darthclaw Killflex. It can be made to add new names to this list through encouragement by staff, and one time they even managed to add the name Pesterbot, as well as the even more ridiculous Patheticon the Garglemost, to its lexicon of names. As you may have surmised, Pesterbot is classified as safe and is treated by most SCP Foundation employees as a humorous oddity rather than a legitimate threat. Many tests have been done on Pesterbot, and they've all conclusively determined that the robot is incapable of inflicting any damage to its opponents. In fact, Pesterbot is more a danger to itself than to anything around it, both because it's incredibly clumsy and awkward, and because it frequently picks fights with other SCPs who are far more powerful than it. One such scenario that could have gone far worse for Pesterbot than it did was its encounter with SCP-846, also known as Robo-Dude, one of the many Dr. Wondertainment products currently kept in Foundation containment. Robo-Dude is an ordinary-looking toy robot that, upon request, can produce up to 350 robo-accessories that function as real weapons. Robo-Dude can deploy everything from a rocket launcher to a flamethrower to a gun that shoots out an unknown species of insect that can chew through wood. However, Robo-Dude seems to not be sentient, and is unable to use these weapons unless asked to. That ultimately worked out in the favor of Pesterbot. During another SCP-682 escape, the two robots were brought into contact as they both had been broken out of their respective containment spaces during the brouhaha. Robo-Dude, searching for a robo-pal to play with, came upon Pesterbot, who immediately started spouting its usual overdramatic threats.
"I am the Crushmaster, doomed to all I survey," Pesterbot said. "Gaze upon my might and weep. Identify yourself that I might know whose destruction I shall sow.
Robo-Dude, not programmed to know how to respond to such a statement, simply responded by asking Pesterbot if it wanted to play. Pesterbot continued to trash-talk Robo-Dude, until Robo-Dude decided the best way to play with its new pal was to engage it in its Robo-Dance mode. Pesterbot accepted the challenge, saying, "Activate all that you wish, but your fate is sealed. The Kilotron cannot be defeated. I shall render you unto dust with my mad dancing skills." The two robots proceeded to engage in a dance battle, which the awkwardly shaped Pesterbot failed miserably at. While Robo-Dude was a competent dancer, Pesterbot could only gyrate pathetically before it fell over and rolled around the ground, hopelessly out of time to the music coming from Robo-Dude's speakers. The song ended, and Robo-Dude declared, "Robo-Dance is complete, Robo-Pal." Pesterbot was unable to accept its failure, and replied,
"Ha, pathetic one. You have been schooled in the art of the dance by none other than the Mechano Basher, Scourge of 1,000 worlds. Kneel before me before I end your worthless existence." Robo-Dude, unimpressed with Pesterbot's poor sportsmanship, deployed its hydrogen cannon, which it was programmed to do whenever it detected a sore loser. Fortunately for Pesterbot, hydrogen cannon was just the name for Robo-Dude's water pistol. While Pesterbot will attempt to fight anything that moves, the truth is this robot will attack virtually anything it perceives as being even slightly alive. This is perhaps best illustrated by one of the tests of Pesterbot's abilities that involved putting a small speaker at the base of a potted houseplant and speaking through it from another room. The plant was placed across from Pesterbot in the testing chamber, and the interaction was monitored by researchers from outside. Researcher Davies spoke through the speaker in the plant pot. He asked Pesterbot if he could hear him, and it answered, "Who dares? All souls will burn. You will feel the sharp sting of my wrath. Identify yourself so that I may sing damnation upon you as you die." The robot began approaching the plant. Davies, speaking as the plant, identified himself. "I am a split-leaf philodendron, a semi-woody shrub with large glossy leaves." At this point, he had to try very hard not to laugh at the absurdity of this test and the robot's reaction. He continued, "These leaves can grow up to 3 feet long." Pesterbot used its wrench to try and wrestle with the leaves, but was bested by the mighty plant and unable to cause any damage. Enraged by its failure, it said, "Your mockery spells your doom. I have arrived. You will be crushed betwixt my digits." Pesterbot then fell over and was unable to right itself. It struggled and spent 6 minutes trying to stand before its flailing knocked over the plant, which did nothing to help and in fact pinned the robot to the ground. It was at this point that the researchers, who had taken time to compose themselves after several laughing fits, entered the chamber and removed Pesterbot in order to place it back in its containment case. Despite how non-threatening Pesterbot is, there is actually one situation in the Foundation's history where it actually posed a somewhat serious threat. When mobile task forces were sent in to rescue survivors of the events at Site-13, also known as SCP-1730, they were attacked by alternate universe versions of a variety of creatures kept in Foundation containment. One of these creatures was Pesterbot, who in that universe somehow gained control of a larger mechanical body constructed of discarded pieces of machinery. It threw other pieces of metal scrap at the task force as they tried to leave the site, shouting in a much deeper and more intimidating voice, "I am reborn to breathe devastation upon this fetid earth. Pitiful humans, you will feel the dark sting of my never-ending torment." Members of the task force could see the original Pesterbot body on top of the larger metal construct, waving its arms madly. The task force opened fire to little effect. Pesterbot tossed another piece of scrap at them, just narrowly missing. One task force member threw a frag grenade at the robot, which it caught, blowing up its hand. Another one was able to jump into the air and reach the tiny robot atop the larger body, knocking it against the wall and shattering it. Even in the reality where Pesterbot was able to build itself a larger body, it still ultimately wasn't able to put up that much of a fight. Poor Pesterbot, doomed to be a failure in this and apparently every other reality. That's the story of SCP-1370, also known as Pesterbot, one of the most hilariously harmless anomalous entities that the Foundation currently has in containment. Perhaps one day, he'll achieve his goal of conquering the universe. He just has to figure out how to conquer his toy box first. An SCP Foundation researcher is monitoring the salt content of a large tank filled with water. Inside the tank, just under the surface, is a huge mass of rusted metal.
though few pieces have a couple specks of their original shiny surface visible through the dark red exterior. The researcher suddenly looks up from his task though. Does anyone else hear that noise? It's a terrible noise, like metal scraping and scratching against each other. But the heap of metal in the tank isn't moving. Still, the noises continue though, and the researcher keeps staring at the unmoving hunk of metal in the tank. All he can think about is diving in and letting his body become a part of it. Kept submerged in a big saltwater tank at the SCP Foundation is an object, but perhaps a more accurate way to describe it would be as a machine. Referred to as SCP-882, the machine's containment tank is required, according to containment procedures, to be filled with at least 40% pure seawater, direct from the ocean. If at any point the rusty surface of SCP-882 begins to show signs of becoming more like shiny metal, then the percentage of seawater must be raised to 100% until the metal is completely covered in rust. Trying to keep metal rusted? That might sound like a strange concept, but you'll see why it's so necessary soon. SCP-882 looks like little more than a collection of seemingly random pieces of metal, all fused together as if they had been welded. Gears, cables, pulleys, screws, and belts, all different shapes and sizes, all made of different metals. All of these various components do not appear to be uniform or have been made to fit each other, and are instead all stuck together in one big, unstructured mass of metal objects. But SCP-882 wasn't built to be like this. Instead, this seems to be the result of one of SCP-882's latent anomalous properties, the absorption of metal. Any metal that comes into contact with SCP-882 will become permanently attached to it, and after a few days will be a new part of SCP-882. That means that any metal that touches that new piece will also become a part of SCP-882 and on and on. Because of this strange property, absolutely no metal is allowed to be brought near SCP-882, and only organic materials are permitted to come into direct contact with it. That includes using non-metal alternatives to keep the machine securely contained. SCP-882 is suspended in its saltwater tank by organic cotton fiber lines, which also require changing on a daily basis. Any and all researchers that the SCP Foundation has interacting with the metallic mass are required to wear thick cotton gloves at all times. You might think that this sounds pretty easy to contain. Just don't let it touch metal? No problem. Organic materials only. No removal of rust allowed? No sweat. The Foundation staff working with 882 probably felt the same way, until they started hearing SCP-882 make noise. While SCP-882 is usually silent, personnel that spend an extended period of time close to the machine have reported intense grinding or clicking noises coming from somewhere in the mess of metal components. While they start out low and are almost unnoticeable, these sounds get gradually louder until eventually they become completely unbearable for human beings to withstand. So then why don't these sounds show up on audio recordings? Because the grinding or clicking noises from SCP-882 are, in actually, extreme auditory hallucinations. But even though they aren't real, these sounds are more than capable of driving anyone who hears them into a state of psychosis. And here's where things get tricky. The only way to make the noises stop is to offer SCP-882 more metal. As mentioned, any object that is made of any type of metal that comes into contact with the machine becomes a part of its mass. Allowing new objects to become fused to the surface of SCP-882 will cause the grinding noises to subside, but will increase SCP-882's mass permanently. If the noises aren't stopped though, then the mental state of those afflicted by them only grows worse. And some victims of SCP-882's auditory hallucinations have gone so far as to throw themselves into the tank containing it, where they were killed almost immediately, their bodies crushed to death by anomalous forces and becoming unrecoverable from the tangle of gears and random metal objects. The SCP Foundation now requires any of its personnel that work directly with SCP-882 to report any instances of noise coming from the machine. Additionally, whoever reports hearing strange sounds in the vicinity of SCP-882 must turn themselves in for a full psychological evaluation. Depending on the results, The researcher will either be free to return to their work or will face containment themselves at an undisclosed Foundation facility. The surface of SCP-882 exhibits an extreme resistance to damage. According to the Foundation's testing, the metal structure has a tensile strength and toughness stronger than aircraft-grade titanium alloy. Despite this, the machine still seems to be constructed of weaker metals like tin, iron, gold, and many others still yet to be identified. It takes extreme heat and several hours of exposure at that to cut even the smallest portion of metal from the main bulk of SCP-882. But where did it come from? The SCP Foundation first recovered SCP-882 near an island commonly on the northeast coast of Banks Island, one of the larger islands in the Canadian Arctic archipelago. Strangely, not a single scrap of metal, not even underground metallic ore, was found within a 1-mile radius of where the machine was discovered. Stranger still, the small town located nearby seemed to be abandoned, with signs that it had been devoid of any human life for quite a number of years. The collection of fused metal components, later designated SCP-882, was found submerged in seawater. The machine was coated in rust, and the Foundation has chosen to keep it in the same rusty state it has been kept in since its containment. Why? Because when Foundation personnel first attempted to remove SCP-882 from the water, and the rust began to flake away from SCP-882's metal surface, its gears and cogs started to turn. Foundation personnel on site were unsure of what the machine's purpose was, but wanted to halt it in case it proved deadly. A number of ill-fated attempts at containment occurred soon after, with any person getting too close to SCP-882 finding themselves pulled into its mass and crushed to death between turning cogs. After multiple accidents that resulted in the demise of Foundation personnel, Dr. Charles Gears authorized the use of SCP-2519 to help stop the movement of SCP-882's gears. SCP-2519 is an audio file titled Babylon MP3, which features the song By the Waters of Babylon by Philip Hayes and text from the biblical Psalm 137. Playing this file can cause malfunctions to occur in various electronic and mechanical devices, normally reducing the speed at which they can operate or causing a complete cessation of a machine's function. In SCP-882's case, the sound of Babylon MP3 successfully slowed the machine's moving parts, allowing Foundation personnel to safely get closer to it. Teams then cut the massive metal down to a more manageable size with extreme heat, and it was finally contained. However, another question arises. Surely if SCP-882 is a machine, then it must have a purpose, right? And perhaps more importantly, what is its connection to the infamous machine-loving group of interest, the Church of the Broken God? Both of these questions might just have one easy answer. To put it plain and simple, SCP-882 may just be the heart of the Broken God. The Church of the Broken God is a religious organization that the SCP Foundation has had a number of encounters with over the years. Members of the church share in the belief that life, specifically biological flesh-based life, is inherently wrong, even evil. This group worships mechanization, the process of making something or someone more mechanical in nature. According to the beliefs of the church, there were two gods, Yaldabaoth and Mechane, who created humanity together. Yaldabaoth was the god of flesh and animal instinct, granting humans their bodies, while Mechane, the god of machine and intellect, blessed man with the power of free thought. As humankind developed and its civilization began building machines, Yaldabaoth became enraged that they were ignoring the instincts she had bestowed upon them. She endeavored to destroy the creations of man, in an attempt to revert them to the animals she had intended to be. As legend goes, Mechane acted as humanity's savior and intervened to stop Yaldabaoth. The god of machine shattered himself, transforming his body into a number of pieces to form a cage for his fellow god. Fragments of Mechane rained down on planet Earth, fragments that the Church of the Broken God believes it is their duty to recover. However, a number of these pieces are cataloged as SCPs that the Foundation is either aware of or has in containment. They are SCP-882, or His Broken Heart to the Church, SCP-271, His Broken Gift, SCP-813, His Broken Eyes, SCP-1139, His Broken Tongue, SCP-635, His Broken Mind, and finally His Broken Blood, which refers to SCP-217. Often using anomalous technology, members of the Church of the Broken God intend to uncover or steal these various components. The Church's ultimate goal is to bring the correct pieces together and completely restore Meccane's form. It is their hope that he will guide them to intellectual enlightenment and bless them with new mechanical forms so that they can discard their current flesh and blood bodies. However, the Foundation and the Church are certainly not the only groups to have a fascination with SCP-882. Near the Banks Island site where the machine was first discovered, Foundation personnel encountered a man, the sole survivor of the nearby town. This individual, by the name of Richard Wright, was apprehended and brought in for questioning with Dr. Gears. During their interview, Richard revealed a number of details about the townsfolk who had first uncovered SCP-882 and what ultimately became of them. According to his account, the community formed a cult around SCP-882 after a man named Alan found it. The machine's parts had begun to turn and move, but with no clear indication as to what was powering it. Soon, a local priest, Father Pat, also took an interest in SCP-882. Both he and Alan seemed to share the belief that the machine had been built by God for a higher purpose, and encouraged residents of the nearby town to come and offer metal to it. Richard explained that the locals were plagued by the auditory hallucinations typical of long-term exposure to SCP-882, kept awake at all hours of the night by clanking, grinding, and the screaming of metal. Before long, Richard noticed more and more metal items being fed to the machine, with many local residents content to just sit and stare at the mass. He also noticed that Father Pat and Alan both seemed to be acting strangely around the machine, insisting that all the metal that had been added to it still wasn't enough. Then one night, during a communion before SCP-882, Father Pat took a pair of pliers and began tearing out townspeople's metal fillings. Richard watched in horror as the priest wrenched teeth from the mouths of ordinary people and threw them into SCP-882, but still claiming it wasn't enough. Then he turned on Alan, accusing him of hiding metal from the great machine inside his body. The townsfolk turned on Alan, the first one to find SCP-882, and threw him and his metal hip into the machine, his body breaking under its moving parts. Luckily, SCP-882 remains contained, at least for now, until the members of the Church of the Broken God find a way to reunite the heart of their god with the other pieces of its scattered body, and Meccane can rise again, an outcome that his worshippers are eager to bring to fruition, sooner rather than later. Did you ever have to perform a dissection in school? Maybe you had to carve up a fetal pig, or slice into a frog while nightmarish visions of Kermit and a widowed Miss Piggy danced in your head. Though it's rarely a pleasant experience, unless your tastes are on the morbid side, most biology teachers would agree that the best way to learn how something works is to take it apart. As distasteful as it can be to hold a frog's tiny liver in your hands, it definitely does give you a better sense of the pieces that make up the complete creature. But what if there was an easier way to look at the individual parts of a living being? What if you could take it apart without ever having to prep a scalpel or stain your hands with the blood of innocent frogs? Like most of the seemingly impossible things in our world, the SCP Foundation discovered something that allows its users to do just that. In fact, it can handle a lot more than just a frog, and its applications go far beyond the confines of a high school science lab. SCP-291 is a small, plain steel building with a large door on one side. The door has no handle or knob and functions similarly to a garage door. The door cannot be pried open by any ordinary means, and the inside of SCP-291 can only be accessed if the structure is connected to a suitable power source. Once a power source has been connected, the door races and exposes a room inside. It is small, about 4 by 2 meters. It contains a console board, a large screen, and a plexiglass container resembling a coffin. How very sinister. The coffin is large enough to contain a human under 7 feet tall. So sorry, Ferdinand the Cannibal, you're going to need to sit this one out. The coffin sits on a conveyor belt with several tubes connected to the wall above it. On the opposite side of the room, there are holes of varying sizes, each containing a small door that can be opened or closed. Because initial observation indicated that SCP-291 was intended for some kind of human testing, a D-Class test subject was selected for experimentation. The subject was instructed to lie down in the coffin and wait to see what would happen next. The display screen lit up, depicting a grid-lined image of the test subject. Buttons along the console board adjusted the image, showing the skin, muscles, and organ systems of the person in the coffin. There were no words or numbers on the screen, and all of the buttons appeared to have only two settings: on and off. When one of the researchers pressed the first button on the console, the tubes above the coffin began pouring a blue liquid into it. The test subject reacted with confusion, but did not experience any adverse effects. They quickly lost consciousness, indicating that the liquid was some sort of sedative. The liquid continued to pour into the coffin until the vessel was completely filled, at which point it congealed into a thick gel. The test subject's breathing and heartbeat slowed to a stop, and the conveyor belt suddenly creaked to life. The coffin was carried, test subject inside, through a small door that immediately locked behind it. The small room was filled with the sounds of gears turning, machinery clinking, and motors whirring. The display screen was taken over by a large rectangle, resembling a traditional loading screen. After 30 minutes, the process was complete, and the back door of the room unlocked itself. When the researcher walked through the back door, they found another room with a conveyor belt and a row of 24 lockers. Each locker was opened, one at a time, and its contents removed for examination. Inside each, the research team found a different portion of the test subject's body, in a block of some unidentified clear substance. The body was divided in the lockers into these separate parts: brain, lungs, and diaphragm, heart, digestive system, reproductive organs, left eye, right eye, upper left torso and arm, upper right torso and arm, lower left torso and upper leg, lower right torso and upper leg, lower left leg and foot, lower right leg and foot, lower left arm and hand, lower right arm and hand, neck and head, upper skeletal system, lower skeletal system, lymphatic and circulatory system, and skin. Phew, a miracle of the human body, right? Boundless in its fascinating complexities. Each block of body parts was placed back in its designated locker, and the second button on the console was pressed. At this point, the doors to the organ lockers sealed themselves shut, and the sound of the machinery working filled the small space once again. This continued for a duration of approximately 45 minutes. When the machinery went silent, a new plexiglass coffin emerged into the main room, with the test subject inside. He looked identical to how he had looked at the start of the experiment, with no evidence that he had previously been disassembled. The blue liquid slowly evaporated from the container, and the test subject opened his eyes. The lead researcher conducted an immediate interview with the reassembled subject, who reported no memory of the process after initial exposure to the blue liquid. They insisted that the process had been like a good night's sleep, which honestly makes us pretty eager to take it for a spin. A medical examination determined that there were only a few changes to the test subject during the disassembly and reassembly. When they returned to consciousness, the test subject's stomach was empty, they were naked, and all of their hair was gone. With this new understanding of SCP-291's anomalous properties, the Foundation decided to continue their experimentation. With each new test, the experiments became more creative and, unsurprisingly, more depraved. First, a D-class subject was placed in the coffin and disassembled. Then, instead of placing the various body parts in their designated lockers, the vital organs were removed from their storage before reassembly was attempted. This resulted in the equipment shutting down completely. A researcher pressed the third button, which forced a hard reset of the entire process, causing all of the blocks of body parts to eject via an exit hatch. During the next experiment, non-vital organs were removed before the subject's body was reassembled. The appendix and gallbladder were left out, and when the subject regained consciousness, these organs were still gone. However, there was no visible damage or scar tissue in their place. They were simply gone, as if they have never been there in the first place. So, if body parts could be removed from a test subject, could new body parts be added? Could existing body parts be replaced with different ones? A D-class subject in need of a skin graft following a flamethrower-based accident was placed in SCP-291. Once taken apart, a portion of healthy skin donated by another, somewhat unwilling D-class subject was placed in the locker, along with the skin already present there. Once the subject was put back together, the healthy skin had replaced the damaged skin with no adverse effects. Repeat attempts at this test showed that it was effective for limb transplants, heart transplants, and kidney transplants, with a 0% failure rate across all tests. After determining that SCP-291 could be used for an untold amount of good, Making organ donations easier and safer than ever, the Foundation naturally had to pivot to something more useless, but interesting and likely horrifying. After all, it's not like they could ever just make anomalous technology available to the public, right? 2 D-class subjects, 1 man and 1 woman, were disassembled by SCP-291. The brains of the test subjects were swapped, and then they were reassembled. When they awoke, the subjects had the personalities and memories of the brain placed in their body. In a turn of events previously only seen in blockbuster comedies like Freaky Friday and the live-action Scooby-Doo movie, seminal piece of cinema, the subjects had swapped bodies. They were subsequently disassembled, their request to look at their new bodies naked having been swiftly denied, and the brains were returned to their rightful bodies. After the experiment was finished, the subjects appeared mostly normal. However, they did complain of disorientation as well as mental and physical discomfort over the next several days. After going through 2 brain transplants in 1 day, though, that's really the least you can expect. After perfecting the practice of swapping body parts between different human subjects, the ghoulishly curious research team decided to take things in an interspecies direction. A variety of test subjects, including cats, dogs, lizards, fish, mice, and, of course, humans, were selected for this next round of experiments. 20 tests were performed using these new subjects, and only 3 of the experiments were successful in transferring body parts from an animal of one species to another animal of a different one. Attempts to swap body parts between mammals and reptiles or fish proved disastrous. When a fish and a human were both disassembled and the fish's gills were placed with the human's body parts, neither creature survived the reassembly process. The human awoke with a new set of gills embedded in their neck and immediately began gasping for the oxygen they could not take in. Within minutes, they had suffocated. The fish's fate was even worse. It did not reassemble so much as it became a pile of goo, scales, and 2 floating eyeballs. Experimentation with a human and a lizard yielded similar results, turning the lizard into a puddle of organic matter and killing the human test subject after only a few minutes. As disastrous as the failed cross-species tests were, the successful ones were almost as bad. Trial 001 involved a cat and a human. Not wanting to attempt too much at once, the research team opted to just swap out 1 organ, the left eye. Both subjects survived the transfer and were able to use their new eye. The human subject reported full use of the cat's eye, with improved night vision in addition to trouble seeing color. The cat did not enjoy its new eye nearly as much as the human subject, and had clawed its human eye out of its head by the end of the following week. In Trial 007, a successful brain transfer was performed between an adult human man and an English Mastiff. The man in the Mastiff's body expressed discomfort with walking on all 4s, and asked to be returned to his body as soon as possible. The Mastiff in the man's body adjusted to bipedal locomotion in a few hours, but was disassembled after urinating on a researcher's shoes. The final successful trial, and the most unnerving, was Trial 016. A female D-class test subject's reproductive organs were swapped with those of a pregnant Labrador retriever. An ultrasound conducted after the transfer indicated that the Labrador fetuses survived the procedure and could conceivably be carried to term by the human subject. Several members of the research team began to take bets on whether or not she would end up giving birth to puppies, but the transfer was reversed within the day, so we'll never know what exactly would have happened. Perhaps that's for the best. Personally, we hope the Foundation's Ethics Committee gives some of these scientists a very stern talking to about their behavior on this one. When not in use for testing, SCP-291 is to be disconnected from any power sources. At least 2 personnel are positioned outside of its containment at all times, standing guard, and these personnel must be swapped out every week. When it is not connected to any power sources, SCP-291 is considered harmless, though it should still be treated with caution. The main entryway remains closed and locked when there is no available power source, but the door can be opened manually from the inside in the event of an emergency. Any disassembled organisms are stored in a locker in the containment facility, labeled with a Sharpie marker in order to keep track of what specimens are stored there. Whether this is the same Sharpie used to label food in the break room fridge is unknown, but just like Dr. DiRamiro's ham sandwich, it's best to leave these items untouched. Any personnel found to be responsible for missing specimens will be transferred to another project and receive a strongly worded email. Now go check out SCP-1981 Ronald Reagan Cut Up While Talking and SCP-095 and SCP-2295 The Bear with the Heart of Patchwork for more scintillating safe class SCPs.